Good evening and welcome. This is the September 14th, 2022 public hearing of the Land Use Commission. The City Code directs this body to hear applications for map and text amendments, special uses including plan developments, zoning relief, and appeals from decisions of the zoning administrator, as well as to make recommendations regarding the city's long-term planning goals and objectives. Depending on the type of matter, this commission will either make a final determination or send its recommendation to City Council. Would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Aravallo is absent. Commissioner Cullen is absent. Commissioner Halleck. Here. Commissioner Hugo is absent. Commissioner Johnson. Here. Commissioner Linwall.
Here.
Commissioner Miranchev.
Here.
Commissioner Pucktell.
Here.
Commissioner Westerberg. Here. And Chair Rogers.
Present. So with 7 members present, we do have a quorum. Also present tonight from city staff are Neighborhood and Land Use Planner Megan Jones, Planner Katie Ashbaugh, Assistant City Attorney Brian George, Planning Manager Liz Williams. This is a formal hearing and there are rules that govern our proceedings. Most importantly, only one person speaks at a time, so all testimony may be accurately recorded. Anyone who wishes to address the commission regarding any matter on tonight's agenda will have the opportunity to do so at the appropriate time. Commissioners may ask questions at any time. Our procedure is to hear from staff on the documents on file and then receive testimony and other evidence from the applicant or appellant. After that, persons wishing to make a statement regarding the matter will have a chance to do so. Any person with a legal interest in property located within the defined notification requirements of the subject property may present evidence, reasonably question witnesses, or seek a continuance of the hearing. When all supporting and opposing testimony and statements have been heard, the applicant or appellant will be given the opportunity for rebuttal or a closing statement. Then the commission will close the record and begin deliberations to consider the standards. The commission will make formal findings of fact based on the testimony and evidence presented, guided by the standards, the commissioner's knowledge of our community, and the recommendations of staff. All testimony is taken under oath. Although we do not apply the strict rules of evidence, please limit your testimony to the proposal as it relates to the standards contained in the zoning ordinance and the corresponding staff memorandum. When testifying, state your name and address for the record and sign in on the public comment sheet. Our meetings are audio and video recorded. Please make sure that you are at a microphone when asking questions or making statements so that you can be properly recorded. All proceedings are subject to broadcast at a later date. Any matter not concluded at tonight's hearing will be continued to our next regularly scheduled meeting. On the agenda this evening, we have one case, which is 22 PLND 0020 for 162131 Chicago Avenue. Is the applicant present? Yes. Thank you. With that, we will move into our agenda. The first item being the approval of minutes for August 24th, 2022. Has everyone had a chance to look through those, and is there a motion for approval?
I'll move approval.
Moved by Lindwall.
Second.
Seconded by Putel. Is there any further discussion, any edits that need to be made? Hearing none. All those in favor of approval, say aye.
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 Any opposed? With 7 votes in favor, the motion carries and the minutes are approved. With that, we will move on to our old business, which is technically the case for 162131 was continued from our August 10th meeting. At this moment, I'm going to ask anyone who thinks they may be speaking to us on this matter tonight to be sworn. Would you please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth throughout the course of these proceedings? Yes. Thank you. We are going to have some things going on here. I'm going to ask the applicant to please keep their presentation to within 20 minutes. I know there is a neighborhood group, Mr. Froscher. Yes, I'm going to ask you to keep your presentation to 10 minutes. And then we are figuring out the people who live within the 1,000 foot notification will be granted 3 minutes to speak, and everyone else will be given 2 minutes to speak. I will ask you if someone has gotten up and said exactly what you plan to say, it is perfectly fine to get up and say, I agree with the previous speaker, or something that Mr. Froscher has presented as well. So with that, I will ask the applicant to please come forward. No, this is for the applicant, who the developer will be presenting his case first. Give us just a moment.
Is this good?
Tim, you have control?
Does he have a clicker?
There should be one in the lectern. All right.
It work? Set.
All right, I think I've got our technology in place, so if you'd please state your name and address for the record.
All right, good evening, Commissioners. Jeff Michael with Horizon Realty Group. And I'm joined here this evening by my team, Tim Kent with Papa George Hames, Graham Grady and Sylvia Micah with the Taft Law Firm, and I got Jonathan Perman with the Perman Group, and Daniel Michael with Horizon Realty Group, and also Michael Worthman with KLOA, our traffic study. If you could flip to the next slide, please. So as a way of matter of background, I think most of you guys are familiar with us, but just in case you're not, Horizon Realty Group is a family-owned and operated development company. We've been around since 1984. We have approximately 100 employees and about 28 buildings, mostly in the north side of Chicago. We own and operate about 2,400 market-rate apartments, and our focus is on renovating downtrodden buildings, bringing them up to current standards, fixing them up, stabilizing them, and holding them. We're legacy and generational holders, and we're very vested in the neighborhoods in which we own our properties. And we're also the proud owners of the Marion at 1611 Chicago Avenue, which happens to be immediately to the south of the property that we're talking about tonight. Next slide, please. So the Marion, we bought it in 2012. It's been owned and operated by us since then. We've invested over $40 million of our own private capital in turning the Marion around. I don't know if some of you were familiar with it before. We did our renovation there, but it was in pretty bad disrepair, and we basically saved it from probably being condemned. And today it's the home to over 150 thriving Evanstonian seniors and probably the crown jewel of senior living in the North Shore. Next slide, please. And here we just included a testimonial from one of our favorite residents, Luba Ames, speaking to the care and the attention to which we own and take care of the Marion. My father, who's with us today, is there probably 3 days a week, fretting over every little detail of it and operating it as if it's our own home. Next slide. And I want to turn your attention to this QR code. We've been at this for quite a while, for about 3 years now, so I've been faced with pretty much every question or objection you could think of. So we thought it'd be good practice to put all those questions and answers down in writing. So for those of you that are sitting in the audience today and probably have questions, I invite you to scan that. There's a good chance your question's there and get you some answers while you're waiting for your turn to speak. Next slide. Okay, so getting into our project here, this is a aerial shot facing southeast. In the yellow box, you could see a rendering of what the legacy would look like in the context of its surrounding area and the buildings in proximity to it. In our opinion, it fits great within the context of what is already in the immediate vicinity of the site. Next slide. An aerial view. So 1621 is located on the east side of Chicago Avenue. As you can see, the Marion is located immediately to the south. This is directly across the street from the Park Evanston apartment building and almost across the street directly from Whole Foods. Next slide. It's currently improved with a single-story retail strip center, for lack of a better word. There are 3 commercial tenants there now. There's 7 potential commercial bays there. As you know, Found is in that space, and they're leaving at the end of this month, and there's 2 other commercial tenants there. In our opinion, the building has reached functional obsolescence. It is extremely old. It doesn't have the ceiling heights that today's tenants require. We've been at it trying to rent that space since we bought it in 2012 and not had much success. It is in much need of capital repairs and improvements. The MEP systems there are shot and basically non-existent. So for any tenant that wants to come in there, it's going to require a significant capital improvement to bring it up to the standards that today's commercial tenants need. So long story short, that property is simply not being used to its highest and best use today. Next slide. So that brings us to the legacy. The legacy is an opportunity, and it's a unique opportunity for Evanston to accomplish some of the key goals that it's set for itself, including promoting downtown vitality, bringing economic benefit to all of Evanston, providing affordable housing right in the middle of downtown, and creating new job opportunities. I'm going to speak to each one of those. Next, Tim. First, the project is going to inject social and economic vitality into downtown Evanston, a neighborhood that's been confronted with challenges due to the pandemic. The legacy is going to bring nearly 300 residents, their friends, family, visitors, all patronizing the restaurants in downtown Evanston, the shops, the salons. This is going to add a significant amount of sales tax revenue to the city that it could use. It's an opportunity to take an eyesore property that is only marginally contributing to the community and turn it into a crown jewel. Next slide. Second, the legacy is an opportunity to bring about economic impact of over $10 million in the first 13 years alone, with $1.6 million of that coming from the property taxes alone. The current property is yielding about $90,000 in property taxes. For a city whose tax base has only grown marginally over the last decade, the legacy is going to bring sorely needed tax revenue and benefit all of Evanston. Our project replaces, like I mentioned, a functionally obsolete retail square footage on the block with new, attractive retail stores. We're enhancing a streetscape and the retail potential of that block. Next, please. The legacy presents an opportunity to create 18 beautiful, affordable housing in a Class A building in probably the most prime location of Evanston. This commitment is going to make a sizable impact on the affordable housing situation in Evanston, and if it is approved, would represent the largest commitment to affordable housing units in a market rate development in Evanston to date. It would increase the affordable housing inventory by 20% over what it currently is. And it answers those who criticize the IHO for not doing enough, for providing inferior affordable housing, or for not presenting affordable housing in desirable locations. Next slide. Finally, the legacy is an opportunity to provide local construction jobs and a partnership with Evanston residents that get them a foothold in construction and real estate. We're committing to make first hire attempts to Evanston residents and to invest in the future of young Evanstonians by providing a scholarship fund for those that want to get their foothold in the real estate industry. Next slide. So we've been at this for quite a while, and we've been working on the project for 7 years. Or several years, not 7 years. During those years, we've received a lot of meaningful feedback from the community, and we've listened to that feedback. We have a slide here, a quick animation that shows, oh wait, before we get to that, provides just some inspirational photos of what we intend to do there. This will be a Class A building with all Class A amenities that you would come to expect for a building of this type. It's going to have a 24-hour doorman, a rooftop deck and pool, shared kitchen space, dog spas, a fitness center, a working lounge so people can work from home. So we provide, again, just to give you an idea, we've not fully developed interiors and renderings, but inspirational photos of what we intend to do there. Next slide, Tim. So this is the animation I was speaking to. It shows a, go back one. Oh, it doesn't play, Tim? Okay. I don't think we played the animation, but this was the original iteration of our development. I think it started at 28 stories, and what this would have done, unfortunately this is a PDF, but it morphs into what we have now, where we're at the 18-story, 195-foot building. And what it would show is that we reduced the unit count by about 25%. We reduced the FAR by about 30% from where we started, and we've added the 18 affordable housing units to the development plan that previously had 0. And then not most importantly, but equally important is that In response to the comments that we received on the first iteration, we've moved the loading and unloading of the building. Originally, there was a porte cochere that was going to traverse the protected bike lane. We moved all that activity to the back of the building. So I want to address the primary criticism that we received, which relates to the height. And we ask that you consider the IHO ordinance and the stated goals that the city has set for itself when it enacted the IHO, which was to create affordable housing opportunities. As you know, the IHO is premised upon the very notion of granting additional density and height as a mechanism for the city to provide affordable housing that otherwise would not be built. This is accomplished through bonus density provisions that are built into the IHO, as you know. The project seeks to do exactly what the IHO is encouraging and enabling developers to do, but we cannot achieve the goals of providing meaningful affordable housing, especially in one of Evanston's most desirable and expensive areas, without incorporating the trade-offs between affordable units and this added density. The predicament needs to be acknowledged by those that are criticizing the height of this building. The proposed building has a tape measure height of 195 feet. The underlying zoning district already contemplates buildings of nearly this height. So those who argue the building is too tall for the block are not recognizing the nuances of the downtown plan and its zoning. To create these affordable units in the most desirable parts of Evanston, it costs money. There is simply no way to crack that nut without providing the extra density and height to overcome the significant revenue loss that's associated with the IHO units and the sunk costs that are simply associated with constructing a building of this size, such as a foundation, parking lots, amenity spaces that need to be spread over a large number of revenue-generating units. Especially in today's environment where interest rates have skyrocketed, the cost of construction is up 25% over last year alone, and property taxes continue to go through the roof. Our company has proven itself as a genuine business citizen of Evanston, and we believe we've earned the trust to move forward with the legacy as proposed. Just look what we did in the renovation and redevelopment of the Marion. You have the opportunity to work with a local family that has proven to be a trustworthy partner that's already personally invested in the block and that will be a long-term owner and will see this project through its completion. Our plan is to develop, own, and operate the new project forever. We're not a fly-by-night developer that builds and flips a project, leaving the community with uncertain ownership and management. We respectfully request that you support and approve this project, to think boldly, to seize the unique opportunity that's before Evanston, that's going to make a real impact on affordable housing and furthering the goals of creating desirable housing opportunities and add to the vitality of downtown Evanston. At this point, I'm going to turn the floor over to Graham Grady. He's going to walk you through the development site allowances that we are seeking. Tim is also available to walk you through, and Michael, the finer architectural points if your questions should go in that direction. Thank you. Thank you.
Again, if you would just state your name for the record, please.
Certainly. My name is Graham Grady. I'm an attorney at the Taft Law Firm in Chicago. Chair Rogers, members of the Land Use Commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. We look forward to our dialogue with you as well as the other stakeholders and area residents. Just to touch briefly on the standards, and I know details have been provided to you in the staff report, which we've reviewed, and we've coordinated with Megan Jones and other staff of the city. Just at a high level, and then I'll get into a bit more of the details. The al fresco dining opportunity that's created here is certainly consistent with your standards. As Mr. Michaels indicated, we've relocated the drive to the back side of the building, which then allows for more al fresco dining on the street. There's walkable retail, which is one of your standards. There's the uninterrupted bicycle lane, which will be allowed for the whole block. The affordable housing, Mr. Michael was very clear in what your IHO allows in terms of the trade-off between additional height in order to allow a more affordable housing. This, in terms of sustainability, this will be a LEED silver building, again compliant with your standards. The parking deck has been minimized. There are 57 parking spaces here. This is a transit-oriented development location, and we also have been in communication with the local Church Street Garage about the opportunity to lease additional spaces should demand require it, but we've minimized the parking consistent with your standards. There's attractive design that's certainly consistent with other buildings that have been approved or constructed in downtown Evanston. We eliminated the curb cut driveway for an uninterrupted block. Again, bringing new housing opportunities to Evanston. Also, with regard to the alley, We have developed an alley management plan, which will include a contribution of up to $200,000 by the applicant for the resurfacing and redesign of the alley, which many property owners share in that block. In addition, the new building will eliminate the placement of the dumpsters in the back along the alley that creates a confusion and congestion. All of our trash facilities will be located inside of our building, and we also have a waste management plan that will contribute to the use of this building in an orderly, entitled, and timely manner. A couple of the other standards that are referenced in your staff report, the mass, the scale, the proportion, and architecture features of this building all comport with the design guidelines, design standards for the city of Evanston. The scale and building design is similar to buildings that have been approved or constructed in downtown Evanston. The materials that are proposed for this building are appropriate in view of the standards that you provide, as well as the other buildings that have been constructed. Similarly, the roof line of this building is compliant with your standards. The legacy penthouse and amenity floor is actually stepped back from the facade, and that tallest floor is not visible from the street at any location. I mentioned earlier, not only the refuse containers will be inside of the building, but the loading docks are in the building. We believe the 2 loading docks are sufficient for this project, even with move-ins and move-outs, and that 3 loading berths, as stated in the zoning ordinance, are not necessary. The 2 loading berths will be sufficient. Some of the details, again, in your ordinance in terms of the standards. The meters, the mechanical equipment will be inside of the building, so there won't be anything visible from the public way. And again, the parking structure is designed to minimize the number of vehicle access and exit points crossing the pedestrian way. We have no vehicles crossing the pedestrian way. They all come in and out of the alley. We have pedestrian-oriented storefronts. As Mr. Michael indicated, these will be bright new storefronts that are market in terms of their design and their appearance, as well as the opportunities they will create for tenancy. We have clear glass windows, which is consistent with your design guidelines. We are LEED Silver, which is consistent with your guidelines as well. This will be a terrific feather in Evanston's cap for having a LEED Silver building here. And the circulation, both inside and outside of the building, is well designed. The internal pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicular circulation of the building is well designed. Traffic coming in off of the alley. I mentioned the alley improvements that will be made, as well as the alley management plan for coordination with First United Methodist across the alley, as well as the other property owners up and down the block. And the internal circulation of the building is effective as well, including the ability to bring the bicycles through the lobby and onto the street, and not using the alley for bicycles, which I know is not consistent with Evanston's regulations. And then before I turn it over to our traffic consultant, the number and width of curb cuts, we have no curb cuts. So we have relocated the porte cochere entry from the street to the alley, consistent with the direction of the city on the prior iteration of this project. It's now my pleasure to introduce Michael Worthman, KLOA, who prepared the traffic study and is our traffic engineer. Michael?
Thanks. Good evening. My name's Michael Worthman. I'm a principal with the firm of Koenig Lindgren O'Hara Abuna Inc., or KLOA. I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of Illinois. As Graham said, we conducted the traffic study for the proposed development, and just want to give you a brief summary of some of our findings. First of all, the traffic study was conducted based on the methodology accepted within the industry and within the city and most transportation agencies. As Graham said, this development is considered a transit-oriented development for 2 main reasons. The first is its location in the heart of downtown and its proximity to all of the commercial, retail, entertainment, all the amenities, everything that Evanston has to offer. Second is the fact that its proximity to the significant public transportation that's serving the area. The site is located 1/2 mile from the Metro in L. Davis Street Station. There's several bus routes serving the area. As you well know, there's bike lanes in the area. The new, I guess it's not new, several-year-old bike lane on Chicago Avenue. So all of this makes this development is considered a transit-oriented development. And the main key feature of a transit-oriented development is it reduces the reliance of the automobile for residents. Residents just don't need automobiles like you find at other developments. They can walk to restaurants, they can walk to the entertainment, they can walk to transportation to get to and from work. As such, the volume of traffic generated by a TOD and the parking demand of a TOD is significantly lower than what you would find in a typical residential building that's not considered a transit-oriented development. Second, reducing the volume or the new volume of traffic that will be generated is the site currently contains about 15,000 square feet of commercial development, which is currently generating traffic. The new development will only have about 7,500 square feet of commercial development. So 7,500 square feet of that commercial development will be eliminated, and that traffic will also be eliminated.
I'm just going to let you know you're at just about 19 minutes.
Okay,
So,
I'll sum it up quickly. Access to the 57 parking spaces and the 2 loading docks will be provided via the public alley. This is for 2 main reasons. One, the city of Evanston prefers access to be off the alley, and we have been told that we will not get access off of Chicago Avenue due to the bike lane and the pedestrian activity along Chicago Avenue. The impact on the alley will be limited due to several reasons. The traffic counts, and we've done several out there, shows that the alley carries a limited volume of traffic, similar to what you would find in most alleys. The traffic study has shown that the alley's intersections with Davis and Church have more than sufficient capacity to accommodate the additional traffic that will be generated by the development. And the 2-way operation of the alley is really preferred as it helps to distribute that traffic. You can enter or exit either to the north or the south, and it also helps to distribute that traffic on the roadway system. Just one more point. In addition, the development will provide a loading lane on Chicago Avenue for drop-off and pickups and food deliveries. We're looking at eliminating 2 to 3 parking spaces on Chicago Avenue so that we can accommodate those Ubers, food deliveries, and so forth. One unique aspect of this building, it will have a doorman, and that helps in 2 ways when it comes to the loading. One, when the food deliveries come, they just drop it off at the front desk and then leave at the doorman. They don't have to wait for the residents to come down. So that food delivery is much quicker. And second, the doorman is also observing the loading zone. He can manage that loading zone. If he sees someone's parking too long, he can do something about that. I will be here for any questions that you have. I appreciate it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have anyone else who wanted to speak from your groups quickly?
I don't think we have time to go through anymore.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners have questions for the developer?
I have a question. I think it might be for staff, though. Can we review the height issue? Because I mean, I read the material, and I saw your slide presentation that is in our material, and I'm confused because I understand when we're talking about height, I understand there's bonuses for affordable housing, but I also understand that parking is, by zoning, not included in that height. So my question is, you know, what is the allowable, I mean, simple question, what is the allowable considering all of that? And what is the height? And I'd actually like to know what the height is, not to the tallest point, but to where the building sets back at the top. And whether, how close that complies.
I'll address some of that. This slide, I think, helps it. So to get
That's
to
the
your
one I was
question
looking
about
at,
the
yeah.
base zoning height, the D4, and Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, allows for a 105 base zoning height, and with the developer allowances, an additional 40 feet to get to 145 feet. And as you alluded to, the parking structures up to 4 do not count against that height. So in theory, if you had 4 levels of parking structure and a residential building on top of that, you could, in theory, get to 185 feet of tape measure height. Our building is tape measure height 195 feet, counting the penthouse on the very tippy-top floor there,
Without the penthouse?
185. And
So you're,
And it's
this
zoning-
This is a true statement. You comply with the height that's required with zoning, except for that penthouse which is set back. Is that a true statement?
Nuanced in that, well, our zoning height is 174 feet because you don't count the parking decks. So we're technically at 174 zoning height compared to 145 zoning height.
No, I know, but that doesn't include the bonuses, correct? Or not? That's where I'm confused.
So there are no additional bonuses, so to speak, with the height. It would be a site development allowance.
That's what I'm talking about.
Right. So they get the 40 feet that they can request a site development allowance for, which would get them to 145. You don't automatically get 40 additional feet if you don't have 4 stories or 40 feet worth of parking
But they
within the
do,
development.
so,
They only have 2 stories.
oh, 2
or
stories, I see. Okay, I'm sorry.
roughly 20 feet of parking
Okay.
height.
To your point, Commissioner,
this
someone
development.
can build a 185-foot building there if there were 4 stories of parking structure.
If there were 4 stories.
Correct.
But there isn't, there's 2
Correct.
stories. Okay.
That's correct.
So how many feet are you, considering all the bonuses and everything, how many feet are you above what's allowed?
Well, I think, Megan, again, I think we're technically a 174-foot zoning height versus a 145-foot zoning height.
So 30 feet.
Correct.
Other questions from commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Miranchov?
I have a couple of
include the $200,000, would that include
Sure.
the Marion as well?
To clarify, so we obviously intend on repaving the 127 feet that we're probably going to break up as we're doing our construction.
And that's the whole,
Yes.
both, the whole width?
Exactly. The $200,000 number that you're referring to is one of the public benefits. We're offering an additional $200,000 to just fix the alley, the full length of the alley from Davis to Chicago on a proportionate basis, provided that the other property owners that are abutting that alley also, share in that plan.
I guess the question becomes is if the proportional share, the 200,000 is less than what the normal proportional share would be, does that mean the other alley participants would pay more?
No, it was the cap that we were willing to offer in terms of our public
Benefit,
Yes.
but this could come, that particular piece could come out or we could recommend that come out as a condition.
Correct.
Okay. And then, is there a target demographic for the units?
Demographic? No. We're offering unit types of different sizes. It's pretty typical of a building this size. It'll have studios, 1s and 2s. I think we'll have a spattering of 3s on the higher floors. But we're thinking it's Evanstonians. We're not looking to attract students. I know that's been raised as a concern. And empty nesters, just people looking to downsize.
Okay. And then finally, Mr. Worthman was talking about in the packet, it talks about eliminating certain of the parking, 2 or 3 parking spaces in front of the building along Chicago Avenue. Have there been discussions with the city about replacing the lost parking revenue?
We have not gotten into detailed discussions about that.
Okay.
If that's what's required, though, for the loading berth, we would comply.
I think that takes care of mine for the moment.
Commissioner Westerberg?
If you could just talk a little bit about your alley management plan. Obviously, there's a lot of work that's going to be going on during construction, and then following construction, working with the neighbors to assess what issues they have and how you would resolve that.
Correct. So the alley management plan is a plan that we intend to implement once the building is built and operational. And obviously, we would sit down with stakeholders and property owners and get their input on that plan also. And the idea is that, opposed to now when it's just a free-for-all in that alley, we're going to have a plan that could be managed, that could be implemented by us being there, having a shared management between the residential piece and the commercial piece. And basically, the ideas that we thought of are making sure that move-in and move-outs for the building are all time slotted. They're made by appointment through our management. Same thing with commercial deliveries, and finding out from our neighbors nearby what are their peak times so that we could avoid those times. And basically taking other ideas and making a plan that works for everybody and minimize the congestion in the alley.
And I'm assuming that would include the Marion also, so that
Correct.
you'd have basically an alley-long
Absolutely.
jurisdiction that you'd be able to refer to. Okay.
Commissioner Halleck?
Yeah, I know this question is for staff. And it seems like I always ask this question every time development comes in and asks for reduced parking, significantly reduced parking, and they say that, well, we'll put parking in X parking garage, existing parking garage. And so this developer has talked about Church Street. And I think that the staff is monitoring this because everybody can't put additional parking in Church Street. So what is the status of all of that? Is there still, with all the developments we've approved, there still is available parking in these garages?
So earlier conversations indicated that there were a larger policy regarding the parking and how we determine how much parking can be leased. I would also like to revisit maybe some of the parking requirements, but that would be something that I think is probably longer term.
Yeah.
But we are keeping track of how many parking spaces have proposed to be leased, what is actually leased.
And you believe that how many more parking spaces can this development have, well, if they have the need for additional parking spaces, how many can be located in Church Street? Do you know that answer or not?
Offhand, I do not know. I would need to contact our parking manager.
Yeah, because I think that's the number we're talking about. We're saying that sure, there's empty parking spaces, great, and we should use them, but there's a limit.
Right.
And we should know that number approximately to.
We could get the number, to your point, Commissioner Halick, that we do know that garage is 50% leased, because we currently lease spaces for the Marion there.
It's currently 50%
leased, yeah. And we're not even talking about private garages. The Park Evanston across the street, it's private, is nowhere near capacity either.
Okay, all right. I'm just not up on
Sure.
the latest counts.
Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question about the loading berths. I think it was one of your associates mentioned that is the opinion of the development group that only 2 berths were necessary rather than the 3. Could you explain that a little bit further?
From a practical, or are you talking code standpoint?
From a practical standpoint, from what you're
From
proposing.
a practical standpoint, we think 2 is more insufficient. I think we're right on the cusp of requiring that third of space. And I'll let Tim speak from an architectural standpoint. I think there was a little bit of, I'll let him speak to that. But we think, practically speaking, 2 is more than enough. Move-in, move-outs are going to be managed, like I said, they'll be slotted. We're going to have 180 units there. Our retention is our turnover is probably about 40%. So if you do the math, you're looking at probably 70 to 72 move-ins and move-outs a year. That's 6 a month. That could easily be managed. They usually take 2 hours. So they don't usually align with commercial deliveries that happen wee hours of the morning. So we believe that 2 are more than sufficient to handle the capacity that we will have there.
Is there a seasonality to the move-ins, move-outs for this type of building?
You're gonna definitely have more move-in, move-outs in the spring and summer months, and then it pretty much comes close to dormant in the fall and winter months.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Would you be able to go back to the slide that showed the relative heights of buildings in downtown Evanston?
The photo?
Yes. There we go. Thank you. So, again, the question of height and understanding scale and understanding that a narrow building does have some advantages to it. But if you look at Chicago Avenue, you can see that the heights, the taller buildings are all west of Chicago Avenue. You do have the Mather and the 500 Davis building, but they're at around 135, 140 feet. And that's the whole point, is that as you come east from Chicago Avenue, the idea was that the height would be less. And the comprehensive plan talks about scale, of course, and talks about being in keeping with the area around it. So again, knowing that you started at 28 stories, which was a rather ambitious figure for that particular site, can you find a way to look at yourself at 195 or 185 feet and get closer to, where you should be, so that we don't have this kind of abrupt standard on the east side of Chicago Avenue?
Are you suggesting that it's the 10 feet that makes the difference here?
Well, you're looking at a 30-foot difference, basically, right? So I think that's my question, is what's the impact on your program if you were able to reduce to that?
Well, you're obviously going to have less affordable housing units. A lot of this was driven by, again, as I mentioned, having to satisfy those, and as a public benefit, adding those 5 additional units. It'll change the economics of it. As that building gets smaller, we're going to lose those affordable housing units. In terms of the transition zone, yes, it is a transition zone, but as you can see, there are buildings that are clearly violative of that zone that are further east of us. And the thing that's interesting to note is that the D4 zoning district actually has the highest base zoning height of any zoning district. So that's one thing worthy of note that led our kind of process in terms of how high can we go with this building. And then in terms of, I don't know if do we have that chart, Jonathan? John, maybe you could explain the chart better than I can because you created it. We graphed, here, go ahead, Jonathan.
So it's a little blurry, and I apologize up on the screen. I'm Jonathan Perman with the Perman Group, consultant to the developer. This shows you, over the last 20, 25 years, actually even a little more, the taller buildings that have been built primarily in downtown Evanston, or entirely in downtown Evanston, and where our proposal, the Legacy, sits, it would become the seventh tallest building in Evanston. If you go to the next slide, what we're asking for in terms of additional height as a percentage over what is permitted is actually significantly less than what has been granted by at least 10, 12 other buildings that are to the left of the orange bar. So there have been a number of cases where in downtown Evanston, the city has permitted, with a trade-off of a number of public benefits, not just blindly, but offering public benefits, they have offered and been granted height that is significantly more than what we are asking for in comparison.
Comparison to the base zoning height.
Compared to, right, to the base zone. So.
I'm sorry, I guess I'm just having trouble reading some of the names of those buildings. Yeah, that helps a little bit. So again, you are the orange bar. If you can just briefly reiterate this again.
The orange bar shows the percentage above your permitted. You're the creator.
Thank you. Let me see if I can get close to this. So the orange bar again is the Legacy, and what we are asking for is 56% more height than what is permitted. And what we wanted to see was what other buildings have been granted variances in Evanston, and what percentage above what was permitted were they given. And so if I start moving left, Optima Towers, 60% higher, the Mather, 66% higher than what's permitted. I'm not going to read every one. Avador, 66%, starting to get blurry here. The Park Evanston was 176% more than what was permitted. 500 Davis was 225% more than what was permitted. And then you can see the tallest buildings in Evanston, Sherman Plaza, 1601 Orrington, Optima Views, all well over 200% of what was permitted. Again, we are asking for approximately 56% more than what's permitted. It's a big difference.
Understood, thank you.
So
But again,
I'm sorry, I just have a question about that then. So we're looking at percentages, but we aren't looking at any of the underlying zoning to know exactly what a percentage means.
correct.
I mean, 50% of 200, please don't applaud. 50% of 200 feet is different than 200% of 10 feet,
No question. And so we have another, we don't have a slide of it, but we can provide you with another slide that does show, or another graph that shows you what the underlying zoning actually is in each of these instances. And we'll be happy to provide the commission with that.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Commissioner Westerberg, I didn't.
You're correct, Chairman.
That's all right. That was actually my point. But again, not to belabor this, but you are in a transitional zone going to a more residential area. So I think that's where a lot of the concern and the comments are, which is simply what happens to that section of Evanston if buildings continue to go that high? And I don't expect you to answer that. I'm just making that observation.
And it's a very, it's an honest observation and a fair observation, but it just comes down to a policy question. Evanston has made a concerted effort to provide an affordable housing ordinance. We have an opportunity to make a very meaningful contribution to that affordable housing number, increasing by 20% in prime Evanston. And the point is, if the community wants to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, and put these affordable housing units in great locations, this is what the building is going to look like, and unfortunately, when you're in these high-dense areas. If you want to do onesies, twosies in the outskirts of town, this project's not for you. But if you want to make a meaningful contribution, this is what it's going to look like.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Fructell?
Hi. Can you tell me about the process and the work that's gone into seeking LEED certification silver? I see the checklist in the packet showing that it's going to achieve LEED silver and in compliance with the Evanston Green Building Ordinance. And I'm curious if you could talk more to who you used to help you seek that certification, and maybe what sustainable features of the building you've targeted in order to achieve it.
It's a great question. We haven't actually gone through that process in detail yet. We haven't gotten with a consultant yet. We're really waiting to start the formal design process once we're approved.
But we're committing to doing it.
Right.
You don't do it until you get into the design development phase of the plan.
So then who filled out the checklist?
Checklist is that.
Well, we did go through and selected the likely options that could allow us to get to LEED silver. I don't remember what those were off the top of my head, but we are going, we've done several, our practice has done several LEED silver, gold, and platinum projects, so we're familiar with it.
I don't know if you
And it's also required per your plan development requirements to be at least LEED silver certified.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
For what it's worth, when we did the Marion edition, that was also LEED silver certified. So, it's just too premature at this point, but we're pretty confident that we can reach that certification.
A quick question for you. When we're talking about affordable units, I know that there's different sizes of units that you have planned in the building. You said anywhere from studios up to a few 3 bedrooms, but mostly studios through 2 bedrooms. Have you made a commitment, decided what you're using for affordable housing? Will those be studios? Will those be primarily 2 bedrooms?
Right. Per the ordinance, the unit mix of the affordable units will match the proportionality of the market rate units. So as an example, if the building is 30% 1 bedrooms, we will, out of our affordable units, 30% will be 1 bedrooms.
And do you have that already figured out based on just your, I know you don't have architectural drawings or anything like that, but you have a base plan.
I'm not understanding your question.
So how many units are we looking at that are affordable and studio? How many 1 bedroom, how many 2 bedroom?
Do we have the numbers, Tim? I think that's the data, maybe the data plan, I think, breaks that down.
While they're looking, Mr. Chairman, the truth is, the IHO demands that it be proportionate, that the affordable units be proportionate in size to the rest of the building. So the building doesn't open unless it's
I'm just
in
curious
compliance.
because if you have a majority of studio apartments, that means that's what we're getting. If we have a majority of 1 bedrooms, that's what we're getting.
We do have a slide.
Yeah, I don't have the number at my fingertips, but do you know what the unit type?
Here it is. Whoops. The font is so
There
small.
you go.
Can you see it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're challenging me here.
I've got it here. The mix in the building is 14% studio, 53% 1 bedroom, and 31% 2 bedroom. So the affordable mix will match that roughly with, considering
Rounding.
rounding, yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Halleck?
Yeah. One of the standards that we have to comply with is context, neighborhood context. And I was a little negatively impacted by when I saw that you were doing fiber cement panels on the lower levels. Would you consider brick to match to be consistent? Not the same color necessarily, but it's a brick block.
Sure. And the short answer is yes. Tim, do you want to speak to the architecture of it?
We absolutely could consider brick there. We've looked at fiber cement, like a Equitone type of panel is one option. We've also looked at metal panel, and then masonry is another option as well.
Okay. I think from a context point of view, that would be an improvement.
Sure, okay.
Other questions for the developer at this point? All right, thank you, Mr. Michael.
Thank you.
Mr. Froscher? We'll do that as people, because some people may ask those during their comment time. So rather than, we'll do that all at one group. And just for the record, we've been handed a packet, which I guess mirrors your presentation. It's listed as testimony to the Evanston Land Use Commission.
Yes, the same material. Thank you very much. My name is Bob Fretcher. I'm an Evanston resident, live at 1580 Sherman Avenue and within 1,000 feet of the subject development. I want to make clear these are not comments, but testimony and evidence to the LUC. I won't need 10 minutes, but it would ask that Bill Brown, who is chairman of the Board of Trustees of the 750-member First United Methodist Church, and obviously a very significant member of the community, get a couple of those minutes. I will not use those couple minutes. And Paul Breslin, who's leading an Evanston condo group on Hinman, get a couple minutes as well. I will use 6. Where I use quotes, the language has come straight from the city code or supporting docs. 2 introductory points. If you look at page 4, this is really important, and it was cited by Commissioner Linwall. This development is cited in the D4 Downtown Transition District. Transition is part of the name of that district for a reason. The very purpose and intent of this particular district is to provide a suitable transition between the downtown districts and those adjacent to the downtown. If you look at page 5 at the bottom, I want to point out that approval of this development would set a terrible precedent. In fact, you can already see them referring to precedents as a basis for this particular development. This precedent would gut the D4 Downtown Transition District, gut its zoning, gut the standards, and gut the City of Evanston's 2009 downtown plan. Every developer who follows would point to this building as the precedent for putting up their own 18-story building on what is supposed to be a transition block. This transition zoning specifically exists, so that these kind of buildings cannot be built. That's why it's zoned differently. All the references to all those other tall buildings in downtown Evanston are irrelevant. They are not in the D4 transition zone. You must determine, as members of the LUC, that this development meets every standard of approval. It does not even come close. I don't have time to review all the standards that it fails to meet, but I'll hit a few highlights. Turn to page 7. These are the standards of approval for planned developments. The building must adhere to all of these. It must be compatible with surrounding development. It must be compatible with the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. And it must strengthen the pedestrian orientation and scale. If you flip to page 8, as you can see here in that diagram, It is neither compatible with the surrounding development, all of which is less than half its height, nor does it strengthen the pedestrian scale. And if you turn to page 9, it's clearly contrary to the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance for the transition zone, which is to provide a suitable transition. The column on the right is the proposed building. The column on the left is the base zoning for this D4 transition district. There is a chasm between the two columns. If you flip to page 10, other standards for planned development that this building fails to meet are here, including land use intensity. This is not far, land use intensity, 180 units versus the 54 permitted in the base zoning. It will also have a big negative impact on traffic, which I'll talk about in a second, big negative impacts on congestion safety for neighboring homeowners, who you will hear from, the neighboring church, who you will hear from, and the preschool that happens to be based in that neighboring church. I already mentioned the negative impact from the neighborhood planning, gutting neighborhood planning. If you flip to page 11, here I quote directly from the 2009 downtown plan. It's clear what's appropriate on this block on the east side of Chicago Avenue. 66, this is directly quoted from the 2009 plan. 66 to 110 feet in height versus the proposed development's 195 feet. In fact, if you flip to page 12 and you actually look at the metrics, this is again straight from the 2009 downtown plan for the eastern edge, which is the third road down and where this building is, you only get to the high end of 110 feet and the high end of 5 for the far if you include all the bonuses. If you flip to page 14, let me talk briefly about standards for special use. While not all the standards are here, the development fails those I've listed. I've already talked about the first point, the building's failure with respect to the general plan and zoning. The cumulative effect point will be negative when you consider the traffic, congestion, safety, and impact on land values. It clearly will diminish neighboring property values. I'm sure you read the 24 additional comments that came from opposition to this proposal that arrived just since the last continuance. 19 of those were neighbors on Hinman and Church Street, very much concerned about their property value. You'll hear more from some of those people shortly. The developer's traffic study argues no negative impact from the increased traffic. This 180-unit, 300-resident tower will drive big increases in congestion and create safety issues. Let me tell you why, and it's laid out on slides 15 to 19. The developer provided traffic study by KLOI. It could not be more flawed. Residential buildings like this proposal today attract enormous numbers of ride-sharing, food delivery, and package delivery. Think Lyft, Uber, Grubhub, DoorDash, FedEx, UPS, Amazon. Worse yet, and this is by far the bigger impact, these vehicles do not flow past the building, right? They edge to the side, they stop, they back up, they do K-turns, they circle around the block multiple times. They then park illegally, and as was pointed out, the drivers jump out and abandon their vehicles and run up to deliver food or packages. This is already one of the busiest streets and one of the busiest intersections at Church and Chicago in the city. This will be an absolute mess. It will wreak havoc with traffic safety and congestion. The traffic study, I've read the entire thing, all 100-plus pages of it, is completely silent on these kind of impacts. It's silent on the impact of any of these COVID and new app-driven sort of vehicles, nor their unusual driving patterns and what it will have on traffic, congestion, and safety. They also use 12-year-old data in their supposedly approved modeling. Bottom line, this building will create dangerous congestion conditions for neighbors, Whole Foods customers, which also happens to be an Amazon drop spot, the church, and the preschool. In summary, this proposed development, which must be evaluated based on the standards of approval, that is your charter, in writing, 100%, every single one, approval of those standards of approval for special use and planned developments. That's the basis on which this building should be evaluated and denied. Approval would gut the D4 zoning, the transitions district zoning, the standards, the downtown plan, and sets a terrible precedent. If the city or developers want to try to change the zoning, that's fine. That's great, let's do it. But we should not try to pretend that this proposed development meets the standards of approval. Thank you.
I'll make sure that if there's any questions, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name throughout this entire meeting.
It happens, it's happened all my life.
For some reason, I had read it as Frozier, and it's Fretcher. Are there questions from commissioners for Mr. Fretcher? No? Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question for staff. On page 9 of his presentation, he shared the permitted, required, and the proposed. Are you able to bring that up? Does staff have a copy of this, hard copy of the presentation? It's on page 9.
Yeah, I've got it pulled up in front of me. Oh, and I just got a hard copy.
So I'd just like to hear staff's response to this, where we're getting the numbers of 54 dwelling units versus 180, a 5.4 versus a 7.8.
Sure. So actually, I have a slide that actually has a chart that explains some of this, and actually within the staff report that also goes into some detail on that. But I'll start with the density, the dwelling unit. So 54 is based on the lot size. 54 units is the maximum for this particular lot in this zoning district. Since this proposed development meets the inclusionary housing ordinance, they would be able to get 52 bonus units, which brings that up to 106 dwelling units. We don't have any site development allowances related to density. So that's where you get the required or the maximum allowed dwelling units for that particular lot. They are proposing 180 total units, so it's 123 base units. They are proposing to have 13 on-site affordable units, which then yields them 52 additional units, or 13 times 4 for each of those on-site units. So that gets 123 plus 52 to 180. The FAR, the base requirement, and
Excuse me, can I just, this is a comment and a question, I guess it's my opinion, but the trick on this number of units issue is that you could have 50 units, 3-bedroom units, and theoretically 150 people, or you could have 100 units of 1-bedroom units, and it could be 100 people. So it's kind of an odd metric, I think. I mean, I understand there's it's in the code, but I just feel like it's an odd metric.
That's understood, but it is difficult to predict and determine exactly how many people will be in a particular size dwelling. You may have one person who decides they want to have an office and an additional bedroom. So that's why we deal with the dwelling units instead of the actual person.
I just, while we're on the dwelling units, I just want to make sure I understand the math. So essentially, it's 52 units or 54 units that are permitted based on the lot size. Now,
Yes,
the calculation of the bonus for the affordable units depends on how many units are being proposed. So in this case, the original application said 13 additional units, which, then yields 52 additional units. If we were looking at, the 18 that are currently being proposed with the 5 as a bonus, could you also not have done the math saying there are 18 affordable units times 4, which is 72? Is that how that would? Yeah, I'm trying to understand. I understand that the developer proposed 180 units. So so are you working backwards that, 54 are permitted based on the lot size plus the 52, which meant that 128 were the proposed? Is that kind of?
Essentially, we are working backwards. So the 123 units, that's the base that's proposed. They are proposing to have 13 on-site affordable units, which meets the IHO requirements.
Okay.
Because they meet that requirement, they get 4 additional units per on-site affordable unit. So 13 times 4 is 52. So we do the base number that
Based
way.
on, so it's a subtraction, so it's essentially.
Correct. So the 5 additional units are just public benefits. Those are
Okay.
additional.
So
aren't
those
included
would
in the
then
base.
be over and above.
Right. So we would not do the additional bonuses for
Okay,
the
I got it.
public
I
benefit
understand.
units, right.
So, okay. I just was wondering how the math was done, because Thank you.
So to continue, and my screen just went. Yes, all right. So continuing on to the FAR, in the D4, the maximum base amount is 5.4. Since they are meeting the IHO requirements, they get an additional 2, which brings you up to 7.4. They can request a site development allowance, which would be an additional 0.6, which then brings that total amount to 8. They're proposing 7.8, which is above, or below rather, that 8.0 benchmark. So they still need to request a site development allowance, but they are under that amount. So, no questions on that? Okay, for the zoning height, I know there is a lot of discussion, some confusion there. The base maximum height in the D4 is 105 feet. The IHO does not provide any bonuses for this. They can request a site development allowance of 40 additional feet, which gets them to 145 feet. And based on the discussion we had earlier, it is possible to have parking levels that are dedicated to parking that are excluded from the zoning height calculation. That is 4 stories or 40 feet, whichever is less. So you don't automatically get those 40 feet. It's based on how many floors are actually provided in the building.
Okay.
So based off of that, the proposed zoning height is 174 feet and 8 inches. And as they already enumerated, the tape measure height is 195 feet. All right, for parking spaces, the base requirements are 140 feet, so that breaks down to 10 parking spaces for the retail space and 130 units for the residential units. Due to meeting the IHO requirements, we don't count the parking that is required or that would be required for those on-site affordable units. So that brings that requirement down to 130 parking spaces. There are no site development allowances that can be requested for this, and they are proposing to have 57 on-site parking spaces, which includes 8 compact parking spaces. For the loading berths, the base requirement is 3. If we compare the previous iteration, it's actually the retail that kind of bumped up the number of loading berths that they need, so they are required to have the 3. And neither the IHO bonuses or site development allowances allow them to request anything additional, and they're proposing to have 2.
All right, thank you.
I've got one more question for staff. With respect to the site development allowances, is that just something that any developer can just ask for? Or are there any kind of standards or what are the rules with respect to site development allowances?
So within each zoning district, there are general requirements for planned developments. So they vary slightly by zoning district, but there are certain amounts above or below, depending on what you're asking for, that you can request based off of that zoning
Okay,
district.
so that's,
So it's broken down.
So that's essentially a feature of the plan development process. So if, we didn't have plan developments and you can build by right, then these development allowances would not come into play.
Essentially.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions as for staff right this second? If not, I'll move on to the people who live within 1,000 feet of the property. The first two mentioned, Mr. Fresher had wanted to give some time to. If everyone stays within their times, I won't have a problem doing that, but I don't want us to be here all night. The first one being William Brown. And Mr. Brown, if you just state your name and address for the record.
William Brown, I live at 1200 Mulford Street, but I have been a member of First United Methodist Church for 37 years and serve as the chair of its Board of Trustees. I speak to you tonight then representing some 720 members of that church. Thank you for the extra time.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I've spoken on this project multiple times over the last 2 years. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the congregation of our church, and joining me tonight in support of our position is our senior pastor, Grace Matthew. The church sits on the edge of the Lakeshore Historic District and has provided an anchoring presence for the neighborhood since 1870. As designed, the proposed 18-story building is completely overbearing on the adjacent historic built environment. It would be a mere 20 feet away from church. Frankly, it's disturbing that such a tall project would be considered for the east side of Chicago Avenue, where the buildings step down as they move towards the lake in accordance with the city master plan. Further, the new building would be directly across the street from an existing building of more than 20 floors, a canyon effect in the making on Chicago Avenue. City staff reviews have suggested an 8 to 10-story building for this location, something in scale with the Marion Addition, for example. I think that the building's height is designed to maximize return on investment. It's a small site, and the way to leverage return is to build as tall a building as possible. Profit should not be made at the expense of the neighborhood. Besides the height of the building, its impact on alley traffic is a major concern for the church with its 15-space parking lot, just off the alley on the south side of the church and directly behind the proposed building. I would guess the concerns are the same for the tenants at 1616 Hinman apartment building who access parking off this alley as well. At present, the alley is so busy that waiting to leave the church lot often leads to delays of 20 minutes or more, not to mention frequent lack of access to the lot. On one occasion, our senior pastor was significantly delayed in getting to the hospital on an emergency call response. Not a good situation. The proposed building will make a bad situation worse with increased alley traffic generated by the activity of this building. Frequent tenant deliveries, tenants' use of the parking garage, tenants moving in and out, trash pickup, building operations, deliveries, etc. The addition of food service in the planned retail spaces or elsewhere in the building for tenants would result in even more traffic congesting an alley, resulting in greater difficulty in using the church parking lot. In conclusion, the project is arguably on its third time around, having been rejected by all reviewing entities the previous sequences of consideration. Many of us wonder, why at another time? The project as planned would have a number of negative impacts. As planned would have problems of many kinds affecting the neighborhoods, including First United Methodist Church. As a congregation, we ask the Commission to vote no for the project as currently planned. Horizon Realty can do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. The next speaker I have, and one of you was going to get extra time. I don't remember if it was Gene or Paul Breslin. Paul Breslin, okay. Yep. But again, just try to be.
First of all, thank you
And just state your name for the address.
I am
for
Paul
the-
Breslin. My address is 1635 Hinman Avenue, directly across the street from the tower of the First United Methodist Church.
Thank you.
I own a condo unit in that building. Let me get rid of the mask. I have a few brief impromptu comments about the height issue. The 500 Davis building at 135 feet was built in 1980. There was no plan for downtown then. The 141-foot Mather buildings were green-lighted in 2006. The downtown plan did not exist until 2009. Therefore, they are not good precedents for this building. Moreover, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, Chicago Avenue is the dividing line between D4 and D3, and the west side is in D3, and this building would be in D4. So the Evanston Tower building on the west side is not a legitimate precedent either. But I'm mainly here to speak to an issue that hasn't been discussed and is even more troubling, and that is the business history of the developer. During the July 26th meeting convened by First Ward Council Member Claire Kelly, a neighbor asked Mr. Michael whether HRG had declared bankruptcy in 2020. He angrily refused to answer the question. When someone reacts that way, it usually means there's something that person doesn't want you to know. So I began investigating, and I am concerned about what I have found. ARG and its satellite LLCs have been in continuous litigation since 2009, when a tenant, Amanda Bonin, sued Horizon Management for underpayment of interest on her security deposit. The amount was trivial, $1.40, but Horizon dug in. Ms. Bonin tweeted a complaint about the poor condition of her apartment, and Horizon slapped a libel suit on her, which they lost. Other tenants joined in Bonin's suit, which became a class action, and cited violations of Chicago's landlord-tenant ordinance as well as the underpayments. Horizon fought that class action suit for 4 years and lost in the resolution. The dispute was settled in November 2013. Horizon paid $45,000 to the tenants, but then a judge also found them liable for the legal fees that the class action suit had required, and that came to $833,000. In November 2014, not 2020, Horizon did file for bankruptcy and claimed that they could not pay more than a small fraction of the $833,000 award. Mr. Michael and his father moved assets out of Horizon Management to entities not named in the class action suit, which made Horizon Management insolvent as claimed. The firm's owner, Daniel Michael, attempted an insider sale of Horizon assets to his son for $75,000. The tenants claimed that they had been defrauded of the judge's award. The court appointed a trustee to investigate the situation. A trustee is appointed by the court to ensure that the creditors receive fair value and that the bankruptcy itself is not fraudulent. The trustee has no stake in the outcome of the suit and no previous history with Daniel or Jeffrey Michael, and therefore no axe to grind. As a result of his investigation, the trustee filed a complaint against Horizon Management, the other 24 Horizon LLCs, Daniel Michael, Jeffrey Michael, and Daniel's wife, Martha Michael. The document we have is the third and final amendment of the complaint, filed August 22nd, 2017. Its allegations are not yet proven facts, but if they are found to be true, Horizon's behavior has been both foolish and very much illegal.
Mr. Breslin, I'm going to ask you if there are things about the standards that we're hearing tonight that you would like to address.
I think this is something you ought to know. It is going to come out whether you listen to me now or not.
It's not something, though, that it's not one of the standards that we address. So I want you, if you have things to address on the standards, to address those things for us, please.
I protest your interruption, but I will accept it since you are the chair, and I think you're being willfully blind.
Thank you. With that, we will go to the other people who are within 1,000 feet, and I'm just going to call you as you've signed up. Is Jean Breslin present? And next up will be Jennifer Washburn, and I'm just going to let you know who's on deck. Yes.
Chairman, our senior pastor was signed up online, but not tonight on the sheet, so please make sure to include her.
What is her name again?
Pastor Grace in Matthew.
I have her on here. Yes, thank you.
Jean Breslin. HRG also obtained a letter from a bank employee falsely claiming that Horizon Management had sufficient funds to pay the award and employing Jeffrey Michael as chief counsel, even though he was not licensed to practice law in any jurisdiction.
Ms. Breslin, I'm going to ask you to address the standards that are before this board tonight.
I understand, but you cannot comply with the standards if you're in jail. So I would like.
That's not how our standards are written. It has to be discussion about the standards on this particular property.
Well, I'll do another paragraph. The trustees' lawsuit is still in litigation as I speak. The parties were ordered to file dispositive motions no later than September 1st, 13 days before this hearing, with responses to follow in October. Before submitting their first proposal, HRG was already in Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and the defendant in a suit.
I protest this witness over here. This is not relevant to the case.
Please be.
He has no right to sit over here and talk about Horizon Group.
Please, I understand. Please sit down. Ms. Breslin, I will ask you once again to apply to the standards. If you cannot do that, I will ask you to sit down as well.
Okay, I will talk about the $300,000 that HRG has.
That's not a standard. That's not a standard. Mr. Michael, please. Ms. Breslin, if you are addressing the standards, you can remain at the microphone. Otherwise, I will ask you to leave the microphone, please. Thank you. Next up, I have Jennifer Washburn, followed by Becky Taverne. So, Ms. Washburn, if you're literally going to pass the papers back and forth, I'm going to ask each and every one of you to please not address that. We're here to address the standards for the development, not the solvency of the developer.
I would expect you would also be here to hear the constituents in the neighborhood.
We want to hear what the constituents have to say about this project, not about the developer themselves.
We're concerned
or their
about the solvency of this project in addition to all the other concerns we've already stated.
And that's something that can be addressed through City Council if they decide to address that. But we have to we have a certain set of standards that we have to meet.
Okay.
And so we are going to look at those standards.
All right.
Thank you.
I live at 1635 Hinman Avenue, just on the other side of the street. I implore you to do your job and deny this third request by this developer, a request even more egregious than the previous two denied them. This plan violates so many D4 zoning requirements that we've already talked about in detail, so I won't really go into them, but I want to tell you what the impact of them would be. But I want to know really what are zoning standards for, if not for you to follow them. And I implore you again to do so. Please know that I would be fully in support of any development here that meets the parameters of the established zoning requirements. Again, this is egregious. The results of this added traffic and congestion would be to knowingly and willfully make the surrounding area more unsafe. This alley is already an eyesore and is hazardous with unpredictable dangers due to being so narrow and congested. I am categorized as senior citizen, and along with many other older folks living next door to this very site at the Marion, and hundreds requiring supportive living on the next block at the Mather, I've already seen many close calls with cars and bikes almost hitting pedestrians. Allowing this development will definitely compound this problem. Also, I must also find parking a block away from my home due to all the cars from the sold-out Graduate Hotel and people seeking free parking that are shopping downtown or going to the lakefront for less than 2 hours. I can understand that, but the approval of even more congestion with this tower with grossly insufficient parking spaces is unacceptable. I ask you, how could the Michael family even submit such an entitled request for special treatment, even more in violation of the standards than the first two failed ones, unless they felt confident that they already have your members in their pocket? I am relying on you to abide by the city plan standards of approval and the plan for downtown transitioning to a residential neighborhood, standards put in place to protect us who live here, and to keep Evanston distinctly different from larger Chicago. I repeat, we are not Chicago. Please deny this proposal, sending a message to this and future developers that they cannot be bought under your watch. The other message you would convey in adhering to established guidelines is that you are here to represent Evanstonians' best interests. And for that, I thank you.
You were Miss Taverne, right? Taverne, I'm sorry. Jennifer Washburn, was Jennifer Washburn here? Going once, twice, 3 times? Next up I have, and I'm sorry, Pastor, I'm going to mispronounce your last name. I'm doing it tonight to everybody. Grace Imatthew? Pretty good, thank you. And if you'd please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. My name is Grace E. Matthew, 516 Church Street, Evanston. I'm the senior pastor of First United Methodist Church. Esteemed members of the Land Use Commission, the only good thing to come out of this long battle for what is permitted in our beloved neighborhood is that many of us, including me, are now students of the standards of approval for planned development. And this development is not permitted by the standards and should not be permitted. Surely all of us feel safe because we know what the standards permit. Quote of the evening, spoken 3 times by the developers, quote, "We are asking for more than what is permitted," end of quote. So the developer knows that they do not meet the standard. Great project, wrong location. Money-making project, wrong location. First Church is a next-door neighbor of the Marion. We were founded by those who founded Northwestern University. We are the building where Garrett Evangelical Seminary holds their graduation. And for the last 30 years, First Church has housed the JRC for their high holidays. We are good neighbors. When the JRC uses our building for a whole week, we cover all the Christian symbols and we put a banner in front of our rear doors. We are that kind of neighbor. In our memorial garden, I interred Alderman Rudy's ashes, Alderman Julia ashes, and Bishop Edsel Ammon's ashes, to name a few. First United Church is more than ourselves. Our building belongs to the community. As a next-door neighbor of the proposed development before you, I am here to testify that the proposed development does not meet the standards by any stretch of the imagination. And the fact is that according to the standard, this planned development is not compatible with its surrounding development. Why? According to the standards, because of the nature in height, bulk, and scale as set forth in section 6.1, the proposal arrogantly ignores the preservation of the historic landmark that is First Church. It is incompatible. In addition, it ignores the increase of the traffic which puts our preschoolers, children, at risk. The alley we share with the Marion is already greatly congested. It is lined with over 20 of their dumpsters and 3 of ours. Resurfacing will not decrease the traffic. The alley leads to our church parking lot. The church parking lot caters to our preschool teachers and staff. We have a total of 15 persons 5 days a week. It is tricky. You heard about my being summoned to the hospital when a dear member of the congregation took a turn for the worse and a truck blocked the north and the truck blocked the south entry, and I searched for someone to move the trucks, and I admit I did something I swore never to do as a pastor. For the last 30 years as a pastor, I did the one thing I swore never to do. I broke down and wept. Additionally, trucks in the alley will result in a negative cumulative effect, which falls short of the standards. Not only is the church parking lot threatened by this, the huge structure would completely obliterate any natural light on the west side of our church office location. I ask you to put us out of our misery as a community and just simply throw out this development. It just is a great development, wrong location. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Next up, I have Dennis Harder, followed by Philip Gordon. Mr. Harder?
Good evening. My name is Dennis Harder. I'm a resident at 522 Church, which is in the same block as this development proposal. I spent more than 50 years as a professional in city planning and real estate development. I've worked for municipalities, consulting firms, and in university education programs. I note that the proposal before the community is very much like past proposals from this petitioner, and those past proposals have failed to gain support to the greater community. Further, the most recent proposal, almost 2 years ago, was rejected by the Plan Commission and the City Council for reasons of height, number of units, etc., that you've heard about tonight. So what is new with the latest proposal? How is it different from the rejected proposal? Not in very many ways, but in particular it is different because it's proposed to use the number of affordable housing units in the project as a sufficient rationale for overriding the established planning and zoning frameworks for the site. There's legislation that requires a certain number of affordable units be included in the residential projects, a requirement that I strongly support. However, surely the City Council did not intend that providing affordable housing units should be a means for trampling the planning and zoning framework in any part of the city. My main point is, with the proposal being significantly out of sync with the existing planning and zoning framework, changing that framework or those frameworks in downtown Evanston should not be pursued piecemeal through the back door as this approval of this proposal would do. In support of bringing proposals for change in downtown Evanston into the front door, I offer 3 suggestions. First, this proposal should be rejected. Second, the city should review the goals and provisions of the affordable housing legislation on the books to understand how they might be in conflict with the goals and provisions of other city ordinances, for example, the zoning ordinance, and with the planning framework, and then to effect necessary changes. Third, the petitioner should explore the potential for seeking change in the planning and zoning framework for the vicinity of the site. There's a tried and true process available for this that would bring all issues into the community-wide discussion forum through the front door. Thank you.
Next up is Philip Gordon, and then Fred Tannenbaum. Your Fred, is Mr. Gordon here? Philip Gordon, going once, twice. The floor is yours, Mr. Tannenbaum.
My name is Fred Tannenbaum, 807 Davis Street. Been living there for 16 years since they built it. I have a question. The Marion, the gentleman said they worked on the Marion and remodeled it. Looks nice. But then he knows what our rules are, and he knows what Evanston is. So why does he come to us with a plan that the moment before the ink is dried, he sends you pages of things that he wants to change? If he knows the building and he knows the rules of Evanston, he would know not to come one way and then come another way. Example, the traffic on Chicago Avenue, if it's changed by, for instance, he did the Marion. Marion has 2 exits and entrances for people to want to get in and get out of the building. One has a driveway off of Chicago Avenue. When there's an ambulance going there, I can see from my building, the ambulance can pull into the route so they're not on Chicago Avenue. If something happens to a resident of their new building, it's going to be sitting in the middle of the street and unable to give the service that it has to give. Why would he come to our building, or to your building, after he did the work at the Marion, gives you a bunch of things, and then comes to you with changes? He knows what the rules are. He comes to you to try and double time you to change the things so he'll make more money on the job. Thank you.
Baum. And the last person I have within the 1,000 feet notification district is Arthur Altman. Thank you, Mr. Altman. If you'd please state your name and address for the
Sure.
record.
I'm Dr. Arthur Altman, 807 Davis, here in Evanston. I've been here 15 years. Okay, several things. The parking. If the commercial spaces are fully occupied, the people who, servers, the manager, the clients need a place to park. So either it's the street or the Church Street parking lot. Also, the 57 Spark parking places don't account for, what if a tenant says, I really need 2 parking places, or my Aunt Tilly is coming in. So there's always a greater need for parking places than 57. The next is the size of the apartments. I've been to these different meetings too. The 1 and 2 bedroom and those smaller units, I forget what they call them. Anyway, those sizes are very small. I bet you if you looked at all the other buildings around with 1, 2 bedrooms and those small units, you'd find that these apartments are even smaller. So then the next is, there's going to be a man sitting at the desk. And what if somebody comes and says, somebody passed out in the street, can you do it? But somebody in the back wants attention in the alley. What are they going to do? The bicyclers have their right of way, but there's no porte-cochere for somebody to pull in for a short period of time. And like someone said before, there's a lot of type deliveries, Amazon, UPS, and what have you. And then if I was coming in from out of town to visit my Uncle Ted, he would say, you got to go through the alley. What? I don't know. This is a high-class building. Why do I have to go through the alley? So I don't think that's a bonus. I think that's a negative thing to have to go through the alley. And, lastly, unfortunately with COVID and even a little before, the commercial spaces have been open a lot. Joy E moved, and now that other place has been vacant for a long time. When they built that new addition for the Marion, there was empty spaces for a year or two. So I think they're optimistic, and I wish them luck on that, but the renting of these 2 or 3 commercial spaces, there's no guarantee. Do we want even more empty places that are empty? And so anyway, thanks for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Altman. The next group of speakers will be allotted 2 minutes. These are people who signed up to speak but live outside of the 1,000 foot notification. area. The first one is Martha Rudy, followed by Kira Kelly. Is Miss Rudy here? Please come up.
Hi, I'm Martha Rudy. I live at 500 Lake Street. I do get notifications of these meetings, so I think I'm in the zone.
Did you get one from the city?
Yeah.
A little postcard?
Yep. I have for the last 3 years.
But did you got one on this particular project?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay, we don't have you on the official mailing list for the postcard.
Well, I get it, so I don't know what to tell you.
Okay.
But I'll be brief anyway, mostly because, as I said, I'm Martha Rudy, 500 Lake Street. I'm a lifelong member of the First United Methodist Church, located right behind this proposed development. And I want to second what both the chair of the trustees, Bill Brown, and our senior pastor, Grayson Matthew, stated already, that this project, for all of the reasons that they said, does not meet the standards. Secondly, because I don't want to go through all the points again, you've heard them, but I have great concern about the alley and have been out there with the tape measure. And I've brought this up in previous hearings with the developer. I've not seen it addressed. So I want to just lay it out there. One of the concerns, or one of the things is that meets the standards, is that it does not cause undue traffic congestion. And I'm greatly concerned with the back and the alley. There are points in the alley right now that are 18 feet wide. It's not wide enough for two large vehicles to pass side by side. Vehicles have to kind of come into the church's parking lot to get out of the way for another vehicle to pass. If this project, as proposed, is to the lot line, I have no doubt that there will be vehicles trying to get in and out that think that it is okay to pull into the church parking lot that's back there. I have concern about the utility poles, the vehicles that are parked in the parking lot, that they will be damaged, because I have done a lot of research, and I won't go through the details because you guys will be completely snoozing off, but I have a lot of research on the turn radius of vehicles and what is required, and in every case, there's not enough space in the alley to make a 90-degree turn without like swinging around into our parking, the church's parking lot, or other open space back there. So I asked in previous hearings that there be a study about this. I haven't seen anything about it, haven't seen my concern addressed, but that's just one more reason why it does not meet the standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rudy. I have Kira Kelly, followed by Meg Welch. Yes, ma'am, you have a question?
Yeah, I live at 1616 Hinman, and I put in to talk
Could you come up to the microphone just so you can be recorded?
Oh, sure.
Otherwise, it's just a recording of me talking to nothing.
No, I live at 1616 Hinman, and I had requested by email to talk, and as I was coming in, the lady standing out there said I didn't have to sign in because I was already on the list.
What is your name?
Phyllis Adams.
I have you up next, after Meg Welch.
Okay, I'll sit down and come back.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm calling two people at a time. Just Kira Kelly, not present. Meg Welch. Miss Adams, I hate to do this, but you're up next.
I'm getting my exercise this evening. My name is Phyllis Adams, and I live at 1616 Hinman. And my concerns have not been mentioned at all this evening. On that block, there are 3 very old buildings. There's the church, there is the John Evans building, and the original Marion building. All of these buildings were built in the very early 1900s. I'm wondering if, in light of having these 3 historic buildings on our block, if a structural engineer has been contracted to examine whether or not the foundations of these 3 buildings are able to withstand an excessive amount of pounding and hammering. Obviously, the alley is a big bone of contention. You can already see the bricks at the bottom. The alley cannot be widened. So it brings a lot of things to mind, and I just don't think that this block was built for that kind of construction. I worry that we may have a repeat performance of the collapsed condo building in Florida, which fell for structural reasons. And last but not least, on November 17th, 2021, CBS News reported the following about a new lawsuit being filed against the adjacent property of 87 Park Tower, and this is the building next to the collapsed condo. It says the construction of a luxury building next door triggered the collapse of an already fragile Florida condominium that killed 98 people in June, according to a new lawsuit. The lawsuit filed late Tuesday on behalf of the Champlain Towers South victims and family members contends that the work on the adjacent 87 Park Tower damaged and destabilized a building already in dire need of major structural repair. 1616 Hinman also has structural issues. You can see on the side of the building. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Next up, I have Ezra Hilton, followed by Janet Irons. Well, let me get through everybody who is on the list, and then if I don't call you, we'll get to that. So is Ezra Hilton present? Not seeing Mr. Hilton. Janet Irons. These are people who signed up online, so they may not have been able to make it. Fergal Hanks. And then Bernard Riley will be the next person.
How long do I have?
You have 2 minutes.
Okay. So we're in a time of kind of increasing rent pressure.
Could you please state your name and address for the record? Thank you.
My name is Fergal Hanks. I live at 1500 Chicago Avenue. And we are kind of at a time of increasing rent pressures both across the country but also within Evanston. And this development will place kind of downwards pressure on rent in Evanston and make both kind of provide more spaces for people to live but also reduce the rent of people living elsewhere in Evanston. It will make both good use of the Church and Chicago bike lanes going to Northwestern for both kind of staff, graduate students, faculty, but also to Church for people who are taking the metro downtown. The fact that it's transit-oriented development will mean that there will be increased demand for downtown restaurants and other businesses due to the fact that people don't have the ability to drive up to Wilmette, as some kind of comments have brought up as a concern. But most importantly, it will provide both affordable and market price homes, and a reduction in height will come at the cost of a reduction in the number of these homes. Please don't exclude people from Evanston to guarantee property value appreciation of homeowners who make up a majority of the people who are here, I'm sure, but do not necessarily make up a majority of Evanston. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hanks. Bernard Riley.
Hi, Bernard Riley, 1500 Hinman Avenue. I'm president of the board of directors of the 1500 Hinman Cooperative Apartments. I did submit my comments online just very late, but in sitting here tonight, a couple of other things came to mind. 3 things. Number one, this, and for the reasons mentioned by other people, particularly Mr. Fletcher, this is a death star of a project, given the location that it's being talked about. But more important, too, I think shutting down discussion of the business practices of the developer to me represents, I think, a disputable narrowing of the mandate of this committee or this commission. I think that it's a very narrow interpretation of what this commission is supposed to be looking at. And secondly and finally, I worry and I wonder about the expense of public resources, particularly the city's scarce resources, in the repeated consideration, the time devoted to the repeated consideration of a project that from the beginning was patently inappropriate for the area in which it's proposed. Thank you.
That is everyone that I have signed up to speak either online or in person this evening. Is there anyone that I missed? I see a hand up in the back. If you could please come up to the microphone just so we can get you recorded. And state your name for the record, please.
My name is Robert Hecking. I live across the street from the proposed project at 1630 Chicago Avenue. It will completely obliterate our view. The park at Evanston has 283 spots in the parking garage, and the developer is correct, you don't need one for each apartment, but we are about 70% full, so they're going to be short many, many, many spaces. And also, we just had a crisis at the park, is that we didn't anticipate Amazon. Nobody buys a couch at Macy's now. They buy them at Amazon, and they deliver them into our mailroom. The mailroom is flowing over, and this week, when a whole slew of the kids moved in for the Northwestern, they threw all the boxes into the alley. We filled the 20-foot by 150-foot alley with boxes. The garbage people were amazed because we have Amazon now, and we have Lyft and all these services. We can't get out of our parking lot because we have a 3-lane parking lot, and most of the time there's either an Uber driver, FedEx, or one of the other people parking in that driveway, and they get out of the car and leave. So this is just too much for too little of a space. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, public comment is closed. Mr. Michael, you're able to given a chance to answer any of the questions, concerns that were raised, or to make a closing statement before we begin deliberation.
So a few quick points. Thank you, Commissioners. To clarify the history of our application here, there was people alluding to the fact this has been before you 3-4 times. This is the second go-around. There have been several iterations of the project, as I mentioned earlier. There have been many ward meetings, meetings before DAPR, but in terms of an application before public comment, for Land Use Commission, this is the second go-around. So I just want to be clear on that. Comments regarding the bike lane, portico share, delivery, and all that. I want to remind everybody in this room that our original iteration had a portico share. It was original intent and idea to have a curb cut that traversed the bike lane so that we would take all the activity off the street and conduct that activity within the boundaries of our own property. And that was rejected, by the city. The preference was to take that activity primarily to the alley, and that's why that plan had changed. So that was our first iteration. And also addressing what the last gentleman mentioned in terms of boxes piling up and deliveries and all that, we're going to be in a much better position to handle and manage those aspects of today's life because we're a newer building, and we could simply plan for it from an architectural standpoint. We intend on having box balers to compress those boxes, compactors to compress that garbage. So we're not going to be putting the same volume or area or cubic feet or whatever you want to call it of garbage that a like-kind building built 20 years ago is going to be doing. We're going to be able to better manage those aspects. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the commentary regarding our reputation. I take great offense to that. And if you wanted me to spend 15 minutes of your time, I'd be more than happy to tell you the history of Horizon Realty Group and the bankruptcy case that they have all alluded to. I sleep very well at night. We run an amazing business. I would challenge any of you and anybody in this room to go find somebody that has anything bad to say about us, aside from the attorney that is suing us over a $5 matter. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Michael.
Could we ask questions?
Yeah, you have questions?
Sir? Oh, sorry. It's, one of the big issues seems to be height relative to the allowable zoning. And I asked before what the difference was between what is allowable with the bonuses and what you're proposing. And the dimension was 30 feet.
Correct.
So would the project still be viable if, I'm not suggesting we do this, but this question, if you got rid of all the affordable, if that's possible, I don't know if that's even possible, but that would eliminate one floor, I calculated, of, maybe that's not possible, so. And then the other would be to put the 2 floors of parking underground.
So I'd have to look at that specific iteration. I will tell you, we looked at an as-of-right project, and the project lost, it penciled out to lose $2.5 million.
Loss.
Yes, I'd be happy to show you that underwriting.
And that includes the site development bonus? When you say as of right?
It was as of right, it was 78 units. And Tim, you helped me arrive at that number. I can't remember how we arrived at 78. I think it was we had to comply with the affordable requirements.
You know, I'll tell you where some of this is coming from. When you go from 28 units to 18 units, it sounds a little bit disingenuous when you say, well, 18 units is 18 floors, I'm sorry, 28 floors to 18 floors. Say, well, that's as far as we could go. So, was 28 floors is as low as you can go, and now 18 floors is as low as you can go. What about 15 floors?
Again, we would have to look at that. We've had so many iterations of the project. I have iterations of 15 floors, but then it's not the same programming that we've presented here tonight. So I'd have to look at, we have to draw it up and see. But I can tell you we looked at it as a right project, and it loses a significant amount of money because of the compliance with the IHO. Those units rent at literally half the amount of a market rent unit.
I understand. I'm just wondering if there's another solution here that's closer, if not complying with the actual zoning, with the site development.
Again, we'd be happy to look at that.
Other questions? I have one question for staff, and it's going to open up a can of worms that I really don't want us to get into, so it's more of a comment maybe for staff, is when we start looking at our inclusionary housing ordinance and what bonuses we give based on that, we're seeing in this particular case, and I'm not making a statement for or against this in this particular case at this time, but we see a doubling of the number of units that are allowed by adding in the inclusionary housing grouping and getting the bonuses that they're getting. They're 4 times their allotment. So I don't know if that's something, and Claire Kelly is here too, the council member from the First Ward, so I'll just throw it out to you as a comment to everyone, that maybe that is something that needs to be looked at in our ordinance. And it's not something that's our purview to say, but I'm just saying when we start seeing projects that are doubling in size based off the inclusionary housing allowances, maybe we need to look at how do we rework those numbers a little bit, especially in larger developments. So that's more of a comment than a question. With that, though, I will go ahead and close the record, and the board will begin its deliberation. And I'll ask for comments from, yes. Yes, come to the microphone, please.
You had indicated earlier it'd be possible for residents within 1,000 feet to ask a question.
Do you have just simple questions?
I do.
Yes.
I have
Okay,
a very
thank you.
simple question.
Yep.
And perhaps who's ever controlling the screen here could pull up that nice overhead shot from Mr. Perman's presentation where he showed the buildings with the various different heights and how it, it was kind of gray and pink, I think. So this is obviously a question for Mr. Perman, and the reason there's confusion is rampant here, right? And so I want to be crystal clear. The standards of approval are what matters. When people can't meet standards, they confuse, and they use precedent. Precedent can be perverted. So if you could move to that slide that shows all those wonderfully tall presidential buildings in gray and pink. It's one of those looks.
Right in.
Wait.
Oh,
I think
go
you just
back up.
went past it.
Try that one right there.
That one right there. There we go. So, like I said, the question for Mr. Perman is, of all these wonderful precedents, how many of the buildings in pink that are cited as tall precedents to this legacy building are both east of Chicago Avenue and therefore in the D4 transition zone, and were approved after 2009, when the 2009 downtown plan was put in place and the standards of approval were met? I think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer.
Happy to answer. Two. That being, two are in the D4. Wait, let me. One is the Albion at 182 feet, 2019, which is about 46% over. You asked which of the. Hold on. Correct. There are none east of Chicago Avenue. So but to go to something else you brought up earlier, you implied that none of the ones on my chart, it's the one with the orange bar, were in the D4, and in fact there were two. One was the Albion and one is Optima Horizons. Both were in the D4, granted significant greater height.
Thank you.
In a transition zone.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to call to order, please. We are going to close the record at this point. We're going to begin our deliberation. The testimony is now closed. I will ask commissioners for their thoughts in general on the proposal that's here before us. If you turn on your lights, let me know, because they're behind my computer.
Sure.
And then I have to decipher. So Commissioner Lindwall.
Okay. Well, I am going to go back with a bit of history, but generally, I believe that this particular project is, too dense and too tall. And we've, in the staff memos that we talk about, we have the 2000 comprehensive plan, we have the 2009 downtown plan, and obviously we have the zoning ordinance that started out, dates from 1993 that's subsequently been amended to deal with inclusionary zoning or housing and a whole lot of other things. But before that, there was what the 1993 zoning ordinance was based on were two documents. There was the 1986 comprehensive plan and the 1989 plan for downtown Evanston. And I worked with the then Plan Commission on both of those documents. And I think that they're instructive because they talk about the kind of the intent and the history and the allowable development densities that were contemplated. The 1986 comprehensive plan looked at creating opportunities for mixed-use development and pursuing refinements to the zoning ordinance to stimulate economic revitalization. In the 1989 downtown plan really, looked at the downtown in great detail. It envisioned that higher density residential would establish a transition between the downtown core and the surrounding areas. And it really identified higher density housing as an important part of the land use mix. And in particular, the downtown core prior to, the new, the 1993 zoning ordinance had zoning heights of B3 that limited, the base height was 85 feet, and this site was zoned to allow 85-foot heights. And, in the 60s and 70s, the city made a lot of changes to allow higher density housing in the downtown core, which was to the west of Chicago Avenue. Chicago Avenue was traditionally the dividing zone. And, that plan also identified a number of sites, and I think, this site being one as having significant redevelopment potential. The site where the Hyatt Regency is now, that was one. The Albion site was another, and the Optima Horizons site was yet another. And when the intent was to encourage residential development on the fringe of the downtown core. And when the 93 zoning ordinance was adopted, I think a couple of people have noted that the D4 zoning district allows taller buildings than the D3 downtown core base does. And one of the reasons for that was that it was to provide incentives to encourage redevelopment of some of those underutilized sites. And I think that, it's, so there was development incentives built in to the underlying zoning. And if you look carefully at the zoning ordinance, while 105 feet is the maximum allowable height in the D4 district, that's for residential buildings. If you wanted to build an office building, your base height, your maximum height would be 85 feet. So the point is that there are significant incentives to encourage and allowances to encourage density and development in the regulations that we already have. And I think it's also important to note that in the 2009 downtown plan, while this East Development Framework, they called for a 6-story base height for development, and the 110 stories, or the 110 feet or 10 stories was envisioned if you were providing significant development bonuses. So, and I think it's really important to note that the 2009 downtown plan elsewhere in the downtown called for, they were very aggressive in looking for tall buildings. So for the downtown core in the Fountain Square block, they were proposing building heights of 25 to 35 feet, 35 stories. So I think my point is that between the 52 units allowed as a inclusionary housing development bonus and the base and the height allowances and the site development height of 40 feet, I think that the zoning and the city, sufficient incentives are being provided to accommodate an appropriate scale development. So for those reasons, I don't think that this project is appropriate for this site. And I'm not even going to get into the site design guidelines for planned developments, which also, again, they were developed because when the city, set up a mechanism where most larger scale developments have to be planned development and go through that process, those design guidelines were established and adopted to encourage better design. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner Lindwall. Commissioner Westerberg?
First of all, I think the redevelopment of this site would be a welcome thing to have in Evanston.
Use the microphone, please. We can't hear you.
I actually am using the microphone. Is that better?
Use it with your microphone, please. Thank you.
Better?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So I do think redevelopment of the site would be welcome, and I think it should be noted that even if a 8 or 10-story building would be put here, you would still have some issues with traffic, you would have issues with deliveries, you'd have issues with parking. If the city is going to accommodate growth, those things are part of it. I do think, however, that the direction to the developer to route all traffic through the alley has caused some real problems and does tend to impose a burden on the adjacent properties. I understand why the city would prefer that, but when you start to look then at the scale of the building and the size of it and the density and the number of residents, it takes the problems that you'd have even with a smaller development and really amps them up. And I do think that creates a burden on the rest of the community. We've kind of wrestled this before with transitional zones to try to see if we can approve projects that are correctly sized and scaled so that as you get closer to residential areas, there's a little bit more of a gentle brief as you go into them. I really hope nobody uses 500 Davis anymore as a standard for what we should do in Evanston. That was put up a long time ago, and the height really isn't relevant. But I think if we look at the east side of Chicago and understanding that it is a transitional zone, this project does seem out of scale. And it's a problem in the sense that the city wants to see redevelopment and should see redevelopment. But we've gone from 28 stories down to 18 stories, and it still seems as if it stands out among everything else as you go east. And that would be my problem with it, primarily.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Miranchev?
So here are my thoughts. First, regarding the number of dwelling units and the parking. Obviously, the number of dwelling units and the number of parking spaces is too small for this. The number of dwelling units is too many, and the number of parking spaces is too small for these dwelling units. And the deviation from the zoning ordinance is too large for me. The other thing that I would mention is that the building height that is so many times mentioned tonight, if I understand it correctly, it is 105 feet plus the 20 feet for 2 parking garage floors that are proposed. So the total is 125 feet allowance, and we have 195. So it's too big of a change or too big of an allowance that is searched here. I'm also not happy with the fact that the retail space is actually smaller than what we currently have. Evanston needs more retail space, whether it will be used now or later, but this is a street that needs that. So what I would suggest, and because for this project, we are actually advisory board, I would allow myself to advise mainly the architectural part of this development. Why not use the whole lot? It is 110 by 170 feet. This lot could be developed, I believe, with a courtyard planning scheme so that you cover the blind walls that I talked at the start of this meeting, and you will have a much bigger floor footprint. And then you will avoid what you're showing here on your floor layouts. You have almost half of the apartments with only north exposure. Nobody likes such apartments. You'll have troubles renting them. If you use the east and west side of this lot, the 110 feet, you'll have many more options to avoid, let's call them bad apartments or bad exposure apartments. So it will be, I believe, a much better layout scheme. And why still not using underground parking so that you develop more parking spaces? That's an option. So these are my notes, and as mentioned before, I think it's too large, too tall, and still this project needs work to become compatible with this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Miranchov. Commissioner Halleck?
First of all, I want to compliment the developer for making the changes that you did make from the last application. I think that those were significant. Obviously, the height of the building, the FAR, the relocated entry, which everybody complained that it was off of Chicago Avenue, and personally, I think interrupting the bike path is a bad thing. So even though the alley's tight, if you had a 10-story building, 6-story building, you'd still have the same issues with the alley, and I believe that that's where the access should be. Also, you took a painted concrete building and made it a glass facade building, which I think improved it a lot. I would love to see a project like this in Evanston. I am honestly very concerned about our downtown. I think that when I go there and I walk around and I see the empty storefronts and I don't see restaurants coming back or businesses coming back, I am terrified. And one of the things that could help that is more housing downtown. So I really want to see, I would like to see this project, a project developed on this site. However, as spoken very eloquently by my fellow commissioners, we're not here to change the zoning, and I think we're here to interpret it. But I think that because this is a transitional zone, there are very logical reasons for that, and this is just a little bit too high. Now, the suggestion that my fellow commissioner made on the configuration of the building, maybe that could help. I know it's expensive, but putting parking underground, maybe that would help. As far as affordable housing, maybe you just do the minimal. But I do think the overall goal should be to get something built on this site. But I think the project is just too big.
Commissioner Fuchtel?
I'll be brief. I think it's a beautiful building. I'm pro-development. I like how it's tall. I like how dense it is. It just doesn't fit with the character and intent of the transitional district.
Commissioner Johnson?
Largely ditto what we just heard from my fellow commissioner. I concur with a lot of what has been said by the rest of the commissioners. I do want to tie a couple threads together that the city does need more residents downtown. We do need more vitality and more activation of the existing retail spaces, the restaurants that are closed, the vacancies that are out there, and that we do that by having more people living in and around downtown and utilizing those spaces. But this building is as it's been said before, is out of scale for a transitional zone. And it's not a project that I'm opposed to, but in that spot, it just it is too dense and too tall.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. I will address mine during our review of the standards, since I'll be going through those. I think a lot of things I feel have kind of already been iterated, so rather than continue to repeat things. In order to approve any project or recommend approval for a project, in this case, we are a recommending body to City Council. City Council is the final determining body. We must find that several standards have been met. And one thing I always like to clear up is we hear time and time again that people are asking for above what is allotted, and part of the zoning ordinance does allow for people to ask for things beyond. That's why we have variations, that's why we have site allowances, things like that. So just to kind of help clarify the point that when somebody asks for something, it's not something that they are not entitled to necessarily. It is something that we in the zoning ordinance allow for them to ask from us. It's just not something they can do by right. So I just always like to put that out there so people kind of understand a little bit more about the zoning process. In order to find that this project should be recommended for approval, like I said, there are several standards that we have to go through. The first one is the standards for special use, which you'll see up on the screen over here, although it can be hard to read. The first one being it is one of the special uses specifically listed in the zoning ordinance, and a planned development is allowed in the D4 district downtown, so that standard has been met. Number two, it is in keeping with the purposes and policies of the adopted comprehensive general plan and the zoning ordinance as amended from time to time. This site is identified ideally as a place that would be a mixed-use transit-oriented development. However, it is also within one of our transition districts, and therefore my feeling is that it is in a larger scale than should be permitted because of it being in a transition district. If this were across the street on Chicago Avenue on the west side, I think we'd be looking at this a little bit differently, but I believe that that standard is not met. The proposed development it will not cause a negative cumulative effect when its effect is considered in conjunction with the cumulative effect of various special uses of all types on the immediate neighborhood and the effect of the proposed type of special use upon the city as a whole. This one is, we expect to see actually greater impact in our downtown area. That's where we expect to find the most dense housing and office spaces in our city. But we also have to balance that against the fact that this, again, is in a transition district and does abut residential homes on one side, as well as we've heard testimony to the operations of the church there. So I believe that this standard is not met because it will have a negative cumulative effect on those.
Yeah, and especially the alley, I think.
I'm getting to that. I'll get to that one when we get to traffic congestion. It does not interfere with or diminish the value of property in the neighborhood. Again, this we kind of just talked about a little bit. You know, the one thing that I always have to remind people, we've heard some from the building across the street, is that one does not purchase views. So always be aware of that when you are looking at properties, because someone can always build in front of you and block your view. But with that being said, I think we have heard testimony that the value of those neighboring properties, especially the residences, could be impacted by this. So I believe that that standard has not been met. Number 5, it can be adequately served by public facilities and services. I believe this standard is met. Obviously, this is talking about the ability for the fact that the property has gas, electric, the utilities that are necessary, as well as having access to an alley, things like that. So I believe that standard has been met. Number 6, it does not cause undue traffic congestion. We've heard a lot of testimony on this one, both at the front and rear of the property. I fully understand the city's desire to keep all traffic from cutting across the bike lane on Chicago Avenue. The problem that creates, though, is that people then stop on Chicago Avenue. I live on a very small one-way street, and I can't tell you the number of times my street is just totally shut off because an Amazon truck has decided to make every delivery in the neighborhood from that one spot. So that concerns me, as well as the alley. And the alleys are always tricky along Chicago Avenue and Hinman, because you have residential alley abutting commercial alley, which creates all sorts of nightmares. But I believe that this standard is not met. Number 7, it preserves significant historical and architectural resources. My interpretation of this is that we've heard some testimony about the church behind it. However, my belief on this is really that the architectural and the architectural and historical issues pertain to the site location and its impact. So I believe that this standard is met. Number 8, it preserves significant natural and environmental features. We haven't really heard a lot of testimony upon this. I will note that there was a green garden placed on top of the building in an attempt to provide some green space. So I will say that standard is met because there's not a lot of natural green space there currently. And number 9, it complies with all other applicable regulations of the district in which it is located and other applicable ordinances, except to the extent such regulations have been modified through the plan development process or the grant of a violation, or of a variation, excuse me. So I believe that standard is not met, basically because this does not really follow. Actually, I take that back. I follow this is met because there are no regulations that are in violation. It's more to the transition district being not in compliance here. Those are my findings on the special uses. Does any of the commissioners have anything that they would like to add or object to in my findings? Hearing none, we will move on. The next set of standards are standards for a planned development. These are new standards that just were adopted by City Council about 2 months ago, a month ago. Before that, we didn't have real strict standards, but we have implemented new standards, and these apply to the planned development. So the first one is the requested site development allowances will not have a substantial adverse impact on the use enjoyment of property values of adjoining properties that is beyond a reasonable expectation given the scope of the applicable site development allowances of the planned development location. I don't believe that this standard is met. By granting the site allowances that are being requested, I believe that we are allowing a building that is too large for a transition district to be built, and therefore, like I said, I don't believe that standard is met. Number 2, the proposed development is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. Again, this being a transition district, if this particular building were located on the opposite side of Chicago Avenue, I feel it would be more in keeping with the character, but because we've moved into a transition district, having a building of this height does not really meet the character of the D4 transition. The development site circulation is designed in a safe and logical manner to mitigate potential hazards for pedestrians and vehicles at the site and the immediate surrounding area. This one's a little tricky because we've talked about the fact that we don't want people entering off Chicago Avenue. Well, there's only one other place that you can get to the site, and that is through the alley, which creates its own set of problems. I think that's just kind of going to be a problem on this site. Because of the bike path that's there, because of it being Chicago Avenue, and because of it sharing an alley, again, with a residential district. So I'm going to, I don't know what I want to do on this one. I'm going to say that standard is not met. But again, on this particular site, I don't know without direction from the city exactly how that can be met. Which creates a whole problem. Number 4, the proposed development aligns with the current and future climate and sustainability goals of the city. We really didn't touch on this in any way, but I will say that by having a green space on the top, addressing issues with bird-friendly glass, things like that.
And also the lead silver.
And the lead silver.
I think this is met.
Documentation, that this is met. And number 5, public benefits that are appropriate to the surrounding neighborhood and the city as a whole will be derived from the approval of the requested site development allowances. We didn't really talk about the public benefits. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on the public benefits that were proposed. I mean, obviously, we're including the inclusionary housing, which is one of the goals of the city. And that's what's triggering some of the site allowances that are being requested. The other ones that are listed up here are a scholarship fund for continued education in real estate, promote local artists, environmental site cleanup, electric vehicle charging stations, and composting and recycling of waste.
I have one comment, one thought, and if this project comes back, the tenants that are there on the site right now, I know has found another place, but there's the Mexican restaurant, and then I think a dry cleaner, and I'm not sure what else. But boy, I think one of the benefits that would one of the things we need to do is keep retail in Evanston. And one of the benefits that I could see is subsidizing in some way, because it's, especially a restaurant, it's very difficult to create the space with the kitchen and all that. And so if there's, and I don't, a dry cleaner may be the same, I don't know, but somehow subsidize them to find another space. I would go for that over one or two of the other benefits, proposed benefits.
I think this is met just because of the 5 additional inclusionary affordable housing units, so.
Any other thoughts?
The only thing I'll say is that I think it's good with the additional housing units, but it's a large ask, and I don't think the public benefits, as you go down the list, match the ask. That's all.
All right. Do I have benefit standards?
We're doing, yeah, that's.
Those are the only standards I have, right? Just to clarify.
There's these too.
Oh.
Sorry. There's a lot.
Okay, I'm going to make a recommendation when we're done with this, that we look at all these other extra little standards for specific districts. These are standards and guidelines for planned developments in the D4 district. Each planned development shall be compatible with surrounding development and not be of such a nature in height, bulk, or scale to exercise any influence contrary to the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance as set forth in purposes and intent. We've had discussion already about this. I'm not going to repeat what I said earlier, but the scale seems large for a D4 building. Each planned development shall enhance the identity and character of the downtown by preserving, where possible, character-giving buildings, enhancing existing streetscape amenities, maintaining retail continuity in areas where it is prominent, strengthening pedestrian orientation and scale, and contributing to the mixed-use vitality of the area. I believe that this standard is met because, again, we're looking for large-scale buildings that will be in downtown. The building does have a nice setback with a tower sort of being in the middle so as not to be a large single block all the way up for 190 feet. So I believe that standard is met. Number 3, each planned development shall be compatible with and implement the adopted comprehensive general plan as amended, the plan for downtown Evanston, any adopted land use or urban design plan specific to the area, this zoning ordinance, and any other pertinent city planning and development policies. Again, we've kind of talked about how it does not really comply with the comprehensive general plan. I will make the comment the plan for downtown Evanston, which was adopted in 2009, is only a guiding document for us because the code was never implemented to change the ordinances to reflect, to enforce that through codification.
The zoning component was not, but the
Right.
plan itself was adopted by the
Yes.
city council.
Yes, but where it conflicts, the zoning ordinance takes precedence. Number 4, each planned development shall be completed within 2 years of the issuance of the special use for the planned development. I have no reason to believe that that would not be applied to without an extension if necessary, as we've run into several sourcing issues with some of our developments in town. So that one is met. Number 5, all landscaping treatment within the planned development shall be provided in accordance with the requirements set forth in Chapter 17, landscaping and screening. We didn't really look at a landscaping plan, although I will note that there was landscaping proposed on the site, so that standard I will say is met. Next one. Standards and guidelines for planned developments in the D4 district. More. Walkways developed for a planned development shall form a logical, safe, and convenient system. We've already had discussion that no curb cuts will be allowed, so that standard's met. Number 2, the location, construction, and operation of parking, loading areas, and service areas shall be designed to avoid adverse impacts on residential uses. Again, a lot of this we've already kind of talked about with the alley abutting residential districts, but really being the only way that this building can be serviced. Number 3, principal vehicular access points shall be designed to permit smooth traffic flow with controlled turning movements, minimum hazards to vehicular and pedestrian traffic. Again, kind of reiterating what we've said before. Planned development shall provide, if possible, for underground installation of utilities. Not something that we discussed at this particular time. I don't know that that was noted anywhere in our packet. Plan development shall be provided a market feasibility statement. That was, I believe.
There was one in the original application, although it is pre-pandemic,
Right.
but there was one there.
And that's something that updates as you move closer into developing a building anyway. For every planned development, there shall be provided a traffic circulation impact study. We did receive a traffic study from KLOA, which was included in our packet. Number 7, the zoning administrator may, at his or her discretion, require of the applicant additional studies or impact analyses. I don't believe any have been requested by the zoning department for this particular project. The wind study, and so that the applicant explained until they worked closer to where they were in terms of size and density, it didn't make a lot of sense. So that standard will be met. Do I have any more? Okay.
Okay, we're good.
All right. So with that, you will see we have many, many standards that we go through on a project like this. At this point, we are a recommending body, so I will ask if there.
If I might, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Again, it's Graham Grady, attorney on behalf of the applicant. First of all, we want to thank you all very much. We know you put an incredible amount of time, energy, and thought into your work on behalf of the citizens. We also want to thank everyone who came to the microphone to speak about the project. On behalf of the applicant, we would like to ask that our application be continued. We would like to look at reviewing everything we heard from you with the prospect of modifying the project significantly. We want to look at the different financial models. We want to look at the different use models. We want to look at the changes that have occurred in how people use properties in a post-COVID world. We need to look at costs. We need to look at supply chain. We need to take into consideration all the things that we have heard from you. We would respectfully request to continue the matter. We won't be coming back in 30 days. It will take us longer than that. But we would like to express our appreciation and let you know that we have heard you, and we hope to take into consideration the many, many considerations that the members of the commission have stated, as well as the members of the public. We've read all the comments that have been submitted, and we do not take them lightly. With that, that is our request. If you would please.
So I would look to staff here usually for these sorts of projects where something is being drastically changed. We would require a new application. It's not my purview to say this, but I don't know if we can grant them an application under the old without starting them all over from scratch and making them pay all the new fees and everything again, but they would have to go through, present new drawings, new plans, renotice the public, et cetera, so that normally when we do a continuance, there's no additional notification to the public.
No, we would actually want to engage in the notification because we'd want to explain that the old building was X, the new building is Y, et cetera.
So I'm looking to staff. My recommendation would be that we basically just sort of, I thought she was coming up to the microphone.
I would think that we want to finish our recommendation and then goes to the city council, and, at that point, they could withdraw and decide to, resubmit, because I think that the commission should finish our deliberations, would be my suggestion.
Maybe they don't want to go to city council.
I'm gonna ask our attorney if he has any thoughts on this. Just a moment. As I say, I've got a sheet here. You need-
I don't think it's really going to be a continuance. It would be an entirely new application at this point, so, you can, it's not going to be a continuance, essentially.
No, it will not be a continuance. So I think what we ought to do is just take our vote, have the applicant withdraw before it goes to city council, and then reapply.
Well, I want to clarify, we haven't made a decision to withdraw at this point. I was saying is we want to go back, look at the comments that you've raised, and I committed to looking at underwriting different permutations of the building and see if that works. If we conclude that, hey, that doesn't work, we have to stick with what we're doing. I'd like the opportunity to at least come back.
So
How is this different? How is this different than the first application and now there's a second application?
Well, that's what I'm kind of struggling, and I was going to ask the applicant. So if you're looking at changing things, perhaps significantly,
Correct.
Then it would be a new application.
Understood. But what if I come back in 30, 60 days, that we looked at it, we can't really change much, so now I want to continue with your vote and your deliberation? Is that an opportunity? Is that
So
an
I
option?
think maybe, and this is a question again for staff, attorneys, and everybody above my pay grade. If we render a recommendation this evening, can it be held? The city council has to hear it within 60 days of our decision, according to the ordinance, if I'm not mistaken. So we would have to, if we cast a vote tonight, then city council has to decide what they're doing in they have 60 days before they have to appear at council.
Something I don't understand, though, to me, going from 28 floors to 18 floors, changing the facade, changing how the site plan works, that's pretty major, and yet that wasn't a new application, was it?
Yeah.
Or was it?
Everybody was renoticed.
Oh, it was a new
Yeah,
application. Oh, okay. Then.
Yeah. So I think what we do is we go on record with our vote, and then you have 60 days before it has to be, I don't know if it has to be noticed to city council in 60 days. I'm looking to an attorney.
I do not know off the top of my head. I know it's 60 days, either noticed or heard. It's something within that 60 days. I'm sorry, I don't have the code in front of me.
If I recall, I think it is that it needs to be heard, which would just be the introduction, not acted upon. Right, so it would just, it would need to be on a city council agenda within the 60-day timeframe, and they would take a vote to introduce it and then act upon it.
Because any action we take is going to have to be a reopening of a record. It'll have to be a rehearing. Everything kind of has to start from scratch for us. So that's, I think, where we're going to have to go with this, is we will make our recommendation to city council. It has 60 days before it has to appear on council's agenda items. And in that 60-day intervening period, you can decide whether or not you want to reapply, move forward with the project as is, or if there's some little tweak that you want to make before it goes to P&D and City Council.
Okay.
So they could act upon the recommendation of denial by rectifying,
Correct.
attempting to mitigate the concerns that have been heard here, and then council will evaluate how well you've addressed those concerns.
Okay.
And whether it is, and council may kick it back and say, this is too big of a change. We want it to go back to land use.
Okay, so in that case, I would suggest then that we just continue the course. And
Yeah,
have you-
so we'll go ahead and take our vote for recommendation to City Council, which is where we are. And so I will ask if, we always try to make motions in the affirmative so that there's very little clarification having to be about whether you're voting for or against something. So is there a motion for approval of 162131 Chicago Avenue?
I've got questions about the staff recommendation for the conditions. Do we do the conditions first and then the motion?
If we want to address conditions, yes, we should do those first.
Okay, well, I have two things I'd like to, or actually, I think two that I would like to suggest adding. First, I think a number 8, we need to, a condition needs to be, include a construction management plan, which is pretty typical for these kinds of developments. And number 9 would be a condition that an annual payment be made for the lost revenue for the spaces devoted to the parking, to the loading zone. And then at this point, I don't know if it, number 2, with respect to the alley management plan, at some point, I think there ought to be clarification as to, the impact of the cap on the $200,000 contribution. But I don't know that that makes sense for us to really get into at this point.
I think that's going to be a City Council
I think it will be as well.
discussion point.
But I think the construction management plan and the requiring an annual payment for the lost loading zone revenues should be included as a condition.
So actually, can you go back to that page? There.
Yes.
So these are the other conditions that staff is recommending at this time. Additional public benefits are considered, as suggested within the staff report, a donation of $5,000 in lightweight divvy e-bike station purchase and donation to the public transportation fund that could go towards a study. The city is currently working with the CTA to modernize the Purple Line. Number 2, that the applicant adhere to the alley management plan. Number 3, the waste management plan. Number 4, bird-friendly measures continue to be worked on and finalized prior to building permit issuance. I will just note, I know that that bird-friendly glass is something that is very hard to get right now due to some supply chain issues. Number 5, consider adding car sharing space within the building's garage or the vicinity. Number 6, building residents not allowed to park in the neighborhood. Number 7, additional parking spaces leased at the Church Street parking garage and vehicle ownership data on the building residents provided over time to monitor parking demand, as well as then the construction management plan and the annual payment to cover loss of revenue for the parking spaces that create a loading zone on Chicago Avenue. Which Commissioner Lindwall just mentioned.
Okay, so
right.
do we vote on those?
So
So
those are all part of the
motion?
the great
Okay.
motion that is just with the conditions as stated.
All right. So with that, since you want a positive motion, I move to, that the Plan Commission, or the Land Use Commission, recommend approval of the plan development application for 1621 to 31 Chicago Avenue, 22 PLND-0020 as presented by the applicant, with the additional, the 9 additional conditions that recommended by staff and the Land Use Commission.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Lindwall, seconded by Commissioner Puctel.
Would you like me to do a roll call vote, Chair Rogers?
We'll do a roll call vote.
All right. Commissioner Johnson? No. Commissioner Miranchev?
No.
Commissioner Halleck? No. Commissioner Westerberg?
No.
Commissioner Lindwall?
No.
Commissioner Puctel?
No.
And Chair Rogers?
No. So with a vote of 0 to 7, the motion fails, which means that it will move forward to City Council with a recommendation for denial. But again, as we discussed just moments ago, there will be a period of time, and city staff, I'm sure, can push it back to give you as much time as possible to do whatever you need to look into before it moves forward. And then we can make a determination about whether a new application is submitted or whether it moves forward this way. I'd like to thank everyone who came out and stuck with us this evening. It's a long night, but I do appreciate hearing from people in the public and getting everyone's input and thoughts on the projects that are happening in Evanston. Going back to our agenda, I'll ask if there is any communication from city staff that they need to share with us. None? George Halleck has a question, I bet, about...
I want to ask this every single meeting. Seriously, and you know, we have these projects that come before us, and they talk about the zoning that was done 10, 11, 12 years ago. And some of this is becoming out of date. And so my question is, when are we going to have a look at the comprehensive plan?
We
Maybe
are
I should go to
working
the
on
council
putting
meeting and ask
together a new RFP. Yeah. Because we have some ideas on how to change it that we think will make it more effective that I don't want to share right at this moment, but that we will bring forward and present to probably the city council for their agreement before proceeding with the RFP.
So this process is going to take another couple months, few months, and then...
Yes, it will, but I think it will get us on track to have a more successful process.
And does council know about these potential changes? Do they agree?
No, we've just started working on it, but the RFP that was done is quite old. It was done as a combination of requesting a strategic plan and a comprehensive plan, and that isn't a normal format, and there were some benefits that were thought to be gained from it that were not going to be gained from it, which is why we separated it, and we think that it's time to look at a new RFP so that we actually get the comprehensive plan. And we think there are people who may not have applied because they didn't see the relationship between the two and want to bid on both.
So it was sent out as a joint RFP?
Yes, it was a joint RFP. So.
My microphone on. If there's any public comment, this is a chance for members of the public to not address any particular project, but anything, any questions they have. Yes, sir, if you'd like to come up to the microphone, Mr. Breslin, I believe it was.
I would like to know how much money it costs the city to review a proposal of this kind, because this is, by my count, the fourth time around. They say two, but you know, can you keep coming back again and again and again? And is that where my tax dollars are going?
I don't believe we have any restrictions on a project.
Well, do you have the authority to say?
Right.
Do you have the authority to say criteria X, Y, and Z must be met, or we will not
We don't have that authority. If city council
The
wants to.
city council has that
If city
authority.
council wants to grant that to us, they are more than welcome to, but we don't have that authority.
Okay.
And neither
Well,
does staff.
Gotcha, okay.
So that would have to be a decision
If
from council.
someone has ownership interest by contract or owns the property, it is their right to come forward and go through the due process to ask, which they have, and that's how they're proceeding.
Yeah, I haven't, again, it's Graham Grady, for the record, attorney for the applicant. I'm not sure if there's any correlation, but, we do pay a $4,000 application fee, and that may be sufficient to cover costs, or may be a fraction of the cost, but there is an application fee that we pay.
Right. Thank you. Any other public comment? Yes, Mr. Freschler.
Just very quickly, I wanted to thank all of the commissioners on behalf of all of the residents who participated tonight. This has been an exhausting process for us. Some of you are aware that although maybe there's only been 2 formal applications, this is in fact at least the 4th iteration here. We don't have the resources. It's very difficult for us as individual citizens to understand these standards of approval. I hope you see that we made a very, very vigorous effort to make sure we understood what your standards of approval were and tried to make sure that our comments, at least most of them, were relevant to those standards. We appreciate your attention, and I'm hopeful we'll not come back to you to talk about a building of this size and scale again.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, I will ask if there's a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Westerberg moves adjournment. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Lindwald. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we stand adjourned. We will be meeting. Off my microphone yet? On September 28th at 7 p.m. here in City Council chambers. Thank you again, everyone, for your time this evening.